Welcome to the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council Planning Committee on the 30th of April 2020. Due to the current circumstances, this meeting is taking place online. I will ask Chris Harrod from Democratic Services to read out the housekeeping notice regarding how this Skype meeting will be managed.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon to all members, officers and indeed members of the public watching this live stream. Please note that this planning committee is being recorded by the council for live and subsequent broadcast and will be published on the council's website for a minimum of 6 months. In order to ensure that the meeting is managed effectively, please could everyone present follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak to when invited to by the chairman. State your name before you speak if you have not been introduced by name. Mute your microphone when you are not talking. After the committee has heard from the planning officer and received written statements from the public and ward councillors, the chairman will ask committee members who wish to speak to do so by typing RTS or request to speak in the instant message conversation panel on the bottom left-hand side of your screen and click the arrow button to send. Please note that this panel is visible to all parties, and please do not use this panel for any other purpose than requesting to speak. The chairman will ask officers to respond or clarify as required. If at any point you wish to speak again, please type RTS. Please note that when the vote is taken, the chairman will read out the name of each committee member in turn, and they will need to indicate whether they are voting for or against the move or are abstaining from the vote altogether. Finally, please ensure the background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrod. I'll now state each person's name. If you could confirm your attendance and your role in the meeting, please. So I am Councillor Simon Bull and I'm Chair. Councillor McCormack.
Councillor McCormack, Vice Chair.
Councillor Barron.
Councillor Barron, Ward Councillor.
Councillor Bartlett.
Councillor Bartlett, Ward Member.
Councillor Davies.
Chairman, if I may, it's Councillor Kelsey here. I've just tried calling Councillor Davies, but his line is engaged. I think he's still having problems checking in.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kelsey. Councillor Dunlop. Councillor Dunlop.
She was here earlier, Chairman.
Okay.
Chair, if I may, it just appears that Councillor Dunlop has dropped off the call, so we will make attempts to contact her.
Thank you. Councillor Hall.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you. Councillor Hilliard.
Paul Hilliard, Ward Member.
Councillor Johnson.
Councillor Johnson, Ward Councillor.
Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, Councillor Kelsey, Board Member.
Councillor Le Poivredin.
Marion Le Pedvin, Ward Councillor for Newtown and Heatherlands.
Councillor Miller.
Drew Mellor, Committee Member, Ward Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor O'Neill.
Tony O'Neill, Penn Hill Ward.
Councillor Stribley. Councillor Stribley, are you on mute?
Sorry, Chairman. Anne Stribley, Committee Member.
Thank you. Councillor Trent.
Councillor Trent, Aldney and Bourne Valley and Committee Member.
Okay. Mr. Gould.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Simon Gould, Development Management Manager.
Mr. Evans.
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman. Doug Evans, Development Management Team Leader.
Mr. Hodges.
Thank you, Chairman. David Hodges, Development Management Team Leader.
Mrs. Barrable. Mr. Harrod.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chris Harrod, Democratic and Overview and Scrutiny Officer, your clerk for today's meeting.
Thank you. Mrs. Hollyoak.
Jill Hollyoak, also from Democratic Services.
Thank you. Are we waiting for Mrs. Barrable? Is she?
Chairman, Nikki Barrable is now with us.
Oh, lovely, thank you. Did you want to introduce yourself, Mrs. Barrable?
Sorry, Chairman. Problem with the Skype meeting request. I'm Nicola Barrable. I'm the Senior Solicitor for Planways.
Lovely, thank you. In addition, we have officers from Democratic Services providing technical support to the meeting. I'll now move on to the agenda items. Apologies. I will ask Democratic Services to if there are any apologies for this meeting. Thank you, Mr. Harrod.
Thank you, Chairman. I can confirm I've received no apologies for this meeting.
Therefore, no substitute members. Are there any declarations of interest from the committee members? Can you please indicate by typing RTS in the instant messaging conversation panel? Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to declare an interest that I'm Chairman of the Christchurch Commoners Association and I'm Treasurer and Trustee of this association. This association has records going back to 1752 and it involves the land adjacent to the application north of Midlands. So I'd like to declare that as an interest and therefore I've been advised by Nicola Barrable that I have a pecuniary interest and I will not take part in that debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have no other expression of interests. So, moving on to the confirmation of the minutes for the last meeting. Before we get to that, I would like to make a short statement. Members of the committee will have seen an email sent by a member of the public regarding a decision made at the last planning committee meeting in February. The email received 2 days ago requests that I, as chairman, add an item to other urgent business of this meeting. This letter sets out a number of issues relating to the decision taken at their last meeting, many of which will require legal input and advice. I have received advice from the monitoring officer that it would not be appropriate for the committee to consider this matter in the manner suggested, and that the matters raised in the letter will be considered by the planning and legal teams at the earliest opportunity. Okay, unless anyone indicates otherwise, I'm assuming that the committee agrees to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of February 2020 as an accurate record. Councillor McCormack.
Thank you. Regarding the minutes for the police station site on the last planning committee meeting, I was recorded as abstaining, and it read abstaining as he felt misled on the parking situation, and it actually should have said I felt that the whole committee had been misled, not just myself.
Thank you, Councillor. And is that noted, Mr. Harrod?
Yes, Chairman, that is noted. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask if on the minutes that my question to Mr. David Hodges at the last planning meeting and his reply regarding the BMEP, I like my question and Mr. David Hodges' answer added to the minutes. If this is not possible, please could it go as a formative note with the minutes? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Chairman, sorry, just to come back on that, committee members are aware that Democratic Services only make a record of the decisions and any procedural matters when it actually comes to these minutes, and therefore individual discussion is not actually included. this has been the way since the first meeting of the planning committee and has been ever since. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrod. Okay, if there's no more comments, I will assume that we can confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of February as an accurate record.
Agreed.
Thank you.
No, hang on.
Hang on. You've got yes.
Councillor Hall, did you want to come back?
Yes, if I may, Chairman, because after having that email and all the things that were put in there, I can't agree and I won't support accepting the minutes. So I should vote against that. And I'd like that recorded, please.
That will be recorded.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Miller.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I appreciate the legal advice we've been given. This shouldn't be an urgent item, but could I just have some clarification around the point that Councillor Hall's just made? What effect does agreeing the minutes have on the planning notice going out effectively? So at the point of we agree these minutes, does that materially affect anything in relation to the planning judgment that was discussed in the letter the email we received 2 days ago? Thank you.
My understanding is that the confirmation of the minutes does not affect that, but I'll ask Mrs. Barrowboard if she wants to come in there.
Thank you, Chairman. That would be also my understanding. I don't know the details of the issue because I actually had a conflict of interest on that matter, was unable to sit on that committee. But you are confirming the minutes of what was said on that particular day. My understanding is that anything else would be outside of that minute.
Just to be clear, that was my understanding, but I wanted to get that checked. Thank you.
Thank you. So those minutes are agreed and confirmed, and I will sign them in due course. Okay, public issues. Written statements from members of the public, applicants and ward councillors received by the deadline of 12 noon yesterday have been published on the council's website and a link emailed to committee members. After the officer presentation on each individual application, I will refer to these written statements and ask the committee to confirm that these have been received and taken into account. The first planning application we shall move on to is Cynthia House, Cynthia Close Pool. Just allow a few moments for everyone to get the papers on inside. Thank you, Doug.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Cynthia House, Chairman, a former care home, currently unoccupied because of the provision of alternative accommodation. It's no longer, vacancies have no longer been filled. The proposal before you is for a scheme that's entirely affordable housing, 10 affordable houses, 12 affordable apartments. The applicant is the Pool Housing Partnership. As a matter of housekeeping, can I just reference this? Hello?
Mr. Very sorry about this. Can I interrupt you there? I've missed a request to speak and it may have been on the prior issue, so I could just hold you there for a moment.
Certainly, Chairman.
Councillor Trent.
Yeah, I've forgotten the point I was going to make now. You know, it's moved on, so I've just typed withdrawn. But it was to do with the previous bit, I think. But anyway.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Trent. And Councillor Warfordine.
I'm just putting a request in to talk on this item at the appropriate time.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Mr. Evans, please continue.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just in the interest of completeness, the report that you have before you says that no representation was received, and in fact, one representation was received, which suggested that the application or the proposal should also make provision for car parking for existing local residents. Sorry that was included in the report. So the proposals are for the demolition of the existing care home. Just give you a general indication of where in the borough this is. This is in the Newtown Heathlands ward of Poole, as indicated by the red pin on the broad map. Getting more specific, the application site fronts onto the busy Ringwood Road, a principal distributor road, and otherwise has frontages to Cynthia Road and Cynthia
Unknown
Close.
participant is now joining.
And Cynthia Road and Cynthia Close to the rear. I draw attention to the scale of the industrial buildings on the opposite side of the road and the fact that the site has effectively 3 road frontages, only abutting other residential properties on a 4th boundary, and I will come back to that later in the day. So busy distributor road and other boundaries, wholly residential character. The blue outline indicates the position of the existing care home, 2-storey building, and I'd invite you to sort of note the footprint in terms of how it addresses the various road frontages around the site, the degree of setback. Slightly anomalous outlier, the red line that I'm indicating there is part of the application site.
Is now joining.
Is part of, in fact, provides the only car parking available currently to the care home use. So isolated, but historically always part of the care home site and use. Because of the nature of this committee and the absence of any opportunity for members to have visited the site, I will spend a little bit longer than perhaps than usual just setting the scene and familiarising members with the context of the application site. So again, if I could just draw your attention to predominantly 2-storey existing care home. It's frontage to Cynthia Road. Slight change in levels, draw your attention to as you approach Ringwood Road, which is off to the left of that top left photograph. Again, Cynthia Close, the sweep of the pavement round to the right there is into a little service turning head, serving an existing substation. As you can see, that bottom left plan with the blue arrow. And again, the bottom right image, the junction of Cynthia Road and Cynthia Close, and again, the predominantly 2-storey character of the existing building. On the top left photo, I just draw your attention to the existing trees along the Cynthia Road frontage. Just for clarification, there is no proposal to remove those trees as part of this application. Moving on, again, setting the context, Ringwood Road frontage, slightly behind the trees, but the industrial and some retail buildings to the left-hand side of that image on the north side of Ringwood Road, the application site opposite. And again, I draw your attention to that slight change in levels at the corner adjacent to the Cynthia Road junction where the black vehicle is emerging. So classified major and busy road. Whereas Cynthia Close, a quieter residential cul-de-sac, and this is just to set the scene again with that detached area of land opposite. So the principal part of the site within the red line, the main body of the application site, and then on the other side of the road, that small area of land historically associated with the site and previously and currently used as car parking associated with the site. So just again to give you that overview of the site, the 2-storey buildings, Ringwood Road, 2 quieter residential streets surrounding it, and a single common boundary with neighbouring residential properties. How does that fit into the site then? So the red line indicates approximately the outline of the existing care home, and as you can see, the proposals very much seek to replicate the development on this previously developed site. I referenced a moment ago the trees along the road frontage to Cynthia Road, unaffected by the proposal, slightly beyond the existing building line with the new development, similarly into Cynthia Close, but the existing street tree or trees fronting the street along Cynthia Road unaffected by the development. Just draw your attention to a single point of access into the site to serve an internal street, and again that detached area of land which we will return to on several occasions, I'm sure. So, the nature of the scheme. This proposal is for 100% affordable housing. If I can just draw attention to the layout, the 10 houses, all 3-bed, form part of the internal street, 2 pairs of semis, short terrace of 3, and then 3 more fronting onto Cynthia Close, terrace of 3 3-bed houses. The flats in the corner at the junction of Cynthia Road and Ringwood Road, comprising 12 flats, 9 2-beds, 9 1-bed. What does that look like? Just to give you an overview of the scheme and its generality, the long terrace of the 2 pairs of semis and the terrace of 3, backing onto the 1 domestic boundary that the site has, the Cynthia Close frontage with the further terrace of 3 3-bed houses, and the large building, the 3-storey building with the 12 flats at the junction of Ringwood Road and Cynthia Road. Just give you some feel for the architectural style and the materials. Can I just draw attention to essentially on the Cynthia Road street scene, the brick and render elevations, which is shared across the scheme. All of the buildings share that material theme, and grey concrete tile roofs. Again, common across all parts of the scheme to give the feel, a homogeneous feel across the scheme. Can I just draw your attention on this to, again, that change in level as you come into Cynthia Road from Ringwood Road off the left, and you can see about half a storey difference in ground levels into that corner of the site. At the bottom of the screen, the Cynthia Close street scene, again the short terrace, unit 10 on the bottom left hand corner, which is unit 10 on the top right there, and then the access into that interior street where the car parking predominantly is. And again, just to get the feel of that internal street with the interior street with the terrace of 3 and the 2 pairs of semis fronting onto it. Ringwood Road, because of the change in levels as you get towards that junction with Cynthia Road, you can see that tends to reduce the apparent height and visual impact of the 3-storey block of flats. Again, just to repeat the architectural treatment and the materials across the rest of the building. Parking. Because of the inclusion of the detached area of land on the other side of the close, the 6 spaces there, as I say, historically always part of the site, it's been possible to provide car parking to meet all of the car parking standards on the basis of the 10 houses having 20 spaces allocated, the 12 flats having 13 unallocated spaces. How that will be spread across the site is a matter for the site to manage, but I think the layout suggests certain possibilities which we would have to leave to the site managers to resolve, but 20 allocated spaces, 13 unallocated. Coming back to that one boundary that isn't to a street frontage, which is the boundary to 379 Ringwood Road. This is 379 Ringwood Road. This is the boundary of the existing care home to that semi-detached house. Again, top right, I can just refer to that relationship. The red line, where it's under the words existing building, is the edge of, or is the footprint of the existing care home building, which you can see in the photograph top left. The 11.5 metre setback of the long street, let's call it, the short terrace of 3 and the 2 pairs of semis, about 11.5 metres from that shade boundary, which is about double the distance of the existing care home from the boundary that you can see in the top left-hand photograph. Looking at the entirety of the rear elevations of those houses facing towards 279 Ringwood Road, which is that bottom image, you'll see that it's a very traditional and typical relationship between adjoining houses. The layout of those houses is very conventional in the sense that the principal living rooms are on the ground floor, and the first floor windows that you can see with an aspect towards the garden of 279 Ringwood are all bedroom windows. I suggest that that's at that separation, 11.5 metres, that's perfectly normal, acceptable relationship in an urban area, and would not give rise to any material loss of amenity, any loss of privacy to the occupier of 279 Ringwood Road. Chairman, the report dwells in detail on the principle of the loss of the care home, which is a community asset. Policy PP12, the pool local plan, seeks to retain such facilities. As I said, the report addresses this in length, but if I can perhaps paraphrase it by saying that alternative care provision has been provided elsewhere. The old accommodation is no longer viable or fit for purpose, and the site is in a particularly accessible and sustainable location, and its redevelopment with 100% affordable housing is therefore, I'd suggest, to be welcome. Chairman, the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the conditions set out in your report. Thank you.
Before we go to the members' comments, I'm assuming that all members have seen the statement and comments from members of the public. I'll give you a few minutes in case anyone wishes to declare otherwise. Okay, so the only one we have was from Ward Councillor Earl in support. So I'm assuming you've all seen that. And now I will invite any committee members who wishes to speak to do so by typing RTS in the conversation panel. Please do not use the panel for any other purpose. I will ask the officers to respond where required, and I will check that the committee member has finished and then move on to the next request. This does not prevent committee members and officers from requesting to speak again later in the debate. Councillor Le Poivredin. Councillor Poivredin.
Sorry, I thought I'd unmuted. Shall I start again?
Yes, I didn't hear anything. I don't know anybody else did, but
Okay. As ward council for this area, I've been involved with the briefings about this possibility for some time, and of course one concern is the loss of a care home. But I need to point out that maybe this wasn't quite a care home in the way that some people would think of it. It was made up of bedsits, and potential clients, residents, have been essentially voting with their feet. PHP have been, as I understand it, unable to find people who wanted to move in there. The few remaining residents have been relocated into suitable accommodation. So this is not the loss of a much wanted and loved care home. It was an unwanted care home in many respects. But what is also needed in this area is affordable housing, and I'm very pleased to see that this is going to be the proposal is for 100% affordable, much needed accommodation, family homes, 3-bed family houses, flats for couples, families, singles, with adequate parking. I think architecturally it will enhance the area rather than the reverse. The current building is not particularly attractive, whereas these look as if they are going to be maybe conventional, but very, very normal, very useful and very good looking accommodation. One question about the detached car parking, the 6 spaces, are they going to be reserved? I know they're not allocated, but are they going to be reserved for this development, or could it be that residents of Cynthia Close will also use it? That's all I want. I just need an answer to that. That's the end of what I want to say.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Evans, do you want to come back on that parking?
Certainly, Chairman. My understanding is that it will be reserved for to service the development. It forms part of the calculation in terms of car parking provision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I proceed, can I just ask Mrs. Barrable, we have one councillor on the phone, and just for confirmation that you're happy for him to take part in the debate, As he's not seen the presentation, of course he could be watching it on YouTube.
Chairman, I mean, if he's watching it on YouTube, then I would suggest it would be fine for him to take part in the debate. Otherwise, I would suggest not, because he's not seeing the plans that are in front of you. So he hasn't seen the full what's been described.
Thank you. Can somebody check with the councillor on the phone, please, and let me know. We shall move on to Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just a question about the contribution. So I see there's a contribution to SIL, but there was a objection from the Royal Bournemouth and Christchurch Hospital Trust. Could the officer just confirm why we're not paying, why the applicant isn't paying any money to the hospital? Thanks.
Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, mention was made of SIL. Yes, the scheme is liable to payment of SIL and meets the criteria. However, if it is 100% affordable housing, which is the intention, then it would be zero rated for SIL, so will not in reality pay any SIL. Chairman, the issue with the NHS contributions, this is a matter that's cropped up on a number of occasions. It is being looked at with a view to bring forward proposals going forward in terms of securing contributions towards that, in addition to other community assets. However, there is no mechanism, there is no obligation, there is no policy or understanding that would enable us at this time to lawfully or properly collect contributions towards provision of health facilities. So, Chairman, whilst it is a request that we see on a fairly regular basis, or have been seeing on a fairly regular basis, you won't be seeing that kind of request going forward because a formula is being, as I understand it, put forward for policy adoption at some point in the future. So it would be inappropriate for you to now seek to take contributions off the developer for that purpose.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Is that it, Mr. Hilliard?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Thank you. Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Councillor O'Neill. Yeah, this site is known to me. It's a site that's been empty for quite some time. It looks run down and very much to the detriment of the area. The area is quite mixed housing, and I think this is a useful application of the site. I think the design of the site is well considered and actually does add an improvement to the area. And therefore, if there's no other objections, I'd certainly like to move it towards a vote.
Thank you, Councillor. Is that a proposal?
That's a proposal.
Thank you.
I'm happy to second.
Is that Councillor Lepoivre?
Sorry, yes, Marion Le Pedvin.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett, you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chair. In principle, I would agree. Yeah, I have no problems with the application, but there are some elements of detail that I'd like to just talk about, if I may. Some questions to the officers. I've noticed that I'm just wondering where all the wheelie bins will be positioned, because looking particularly at the terraced parts of the housing, I can't see. The only place they're going to be able to store them, I think, for collection is at the front, and they would be there permanently by their front doors. Is that correct?
Chairman, if I could perhaps come in on that, I'd draw the council's attention to the fact that because of the break, it's not a single terrace. Because it's not a single terrace, there is access to the rear, so that each property has access to the rear. So there's the potential for wheelie bins to be in the back garden. Similarly, with the short terrace of 3, each of those have potential access to the rear. So there is the opportunity potentially for wheelie bins to be in a rear garden. The exception, I think, is the mid-terrace property here, which does have an access to adjacent to the substation, but I'm not sure that that's direct to the public highway, so I can't advise you on that one unit, but all of the others have potential for storing bins in rear gardens if rear access gates are provided, which is implied by the layout. Equally, with the with the block of flats, if I can just draw your attention to that part in the corner of the ground floor of the building, which is an integral bin store within the building. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Councillor Bartlett, have you finished, Councillor Bartlett?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, I switched myself off accidentally. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, there are the two centre terraces in particular. It's going to be very difficult for them to get the bins round to the back. I suspect that the bins will all be left at the front of the properties, which is a thing that happens normally on terrace type developments, and it leaves it very unsightly looking, because inevitably the bins are overfilled and overflowing and all the rest of it, and it really looks awful. And I've seen this in many places where you get rows of terraced houses, and it's difficult to get the wheelie bins to the back garden, unless of course you wheel them through the house, which is what people don't really like to do. So I put that down as a marker. I don't think that's a very satisfactory part of the design. I'd just like to talk about the shower. In the block of flats, it does appear that there are no bathrooms, no baths. It's only. Sorry, somebody talking. Sorry. Sorry, Chair. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. There's some echoing going on. If you're not speaking, can other councillors turn their mics off?
That's better. Yeah, in the block of flats, it appears that there are only shower rooms. Is that correct?
Chairman, yes, that's my understanding. That's not untypical, and strange enough, we'll be perhaps looking at that in connection with one of the other schemes going up later on. The space standards reflect that some smaller units will have showers, some smaller units will have baths. There's no requirement in these kind of units to have a bath rather than a shower room.
Okay, thank you for that. And you brought me very nicely on to the next point, is about the national minimum living standards. And I wonder how this stacks up against those. And I wondered if that was the driving factor behind not having a bath.
Chairman, I couldn't speculate as to whether the inclusion of showers rather than baths is a driving factor, but in point of fact, there is a couple of square metres difference in terms of the national standard in respect of 1 bed and 2 bed units, so 1 person and 2 person units with shower rooms rather than bathrooms. So I wouldn't like to speculate as to which drove the other, whether the size of the units were driven by it having a shower or whether the shower drove down the size of units. Wouldn't like to speculate. My understanding is, given that it is Pool Housing Partnership doing the development, the expectation is, my understanding is, that they do meet the necessary or do meet the national guidance. However, I would remind the committee that guidance is not a requirement within the area of the pool local plan. The pool local plan encourages developers to meet those standards, and sets a requirement that there would need to be justification for why, if any of the floor areas fell more than 20% below the national standard. My understanding is these units meet the standards, so that question doesn't arise. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Chair, thanks. So you're confirming that they will be in accordance with the local plan regulations, and certainly not in excess of 20% below the national minimum standard.
That's certainly my understanding, Chair, yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk about the single access point and the parking spaces that are either side of the single access, because I'm assuming that the curbs will be lowered in front of those 4 parking spaces, which I thought it's probably not ideal because you've effectively got the main access point into the site, and either side of that you've got another double set of lowered curbs with cars going in and out of those parking spaces. It just doesn't seem to be ideal because you've effectively got quite a long stretch of the footpath which is effectively being used by cars. Presumably the highways team are happy with that, but is it a point for concern?
Mr. Evans?
Chairman, I'd suggest it's not a point for concern, given that one can assume that vehicle movements will not be huge, given that its vehicles will be manoeuvring in and out of what's effectively a short cul-de-sac, given that pedestrian movements will not be massive, and given that the alternatives would be to move those forward and lose some of the opportunities for landscaping around the end of the terrace and at the entrance to the site, I'd suggest that it's a balanced approach to highway safety and the quality, character and setting of the buildings. I'd suggest it's an acceptable solution, and the fact that the Highway Authority Transportation Service have not raised any objection to that layout in this particular location, it may be an issue in other senses, but in this particular case, that layout, and I'm assuming that the four spaces that the council is talking about are the ones near the end of the terrace of three houses. There is no issue with those in this scheme.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I have no other requests to speak. I do have a motion on the table to accept the recommendation of the officers to grant the application. Before I move to the vote, can I ask the officers if they have anything they wish to add?
Chairman, no, nothing. I think we've. I think all of the points that I would have wished to have raised have been covered in the questioning. So thank you, Chairman. Nothing more.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett, did you want to come back there?
Yeah, yes, please. There was one point I've missed out. In the terraced houses on the ground floor, there's a WC, and it looks as if it goes straight into the kitchen area. Can you confirm that? And I'm assuming because it's there that is acceptable, but it does seem rather extraordinary. Would you like to comment on that, please?
Chairman, that would be a matter that would be addressed in the building regulations, and the council is perhaps recalling that there was a time when there would have been a requirement for, my understanding is, 2 intervening doors between WC and a kitchen. That is no longer the case as far as I understand, but ultimately that will be a matter that will be addressed under the building regulations, and I couldn't therefore comment further on it.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I mean, you know, when you're looking at overall these little points, they all sort of add up to sort of the actual bare bones of accommodation. You know, no baths, no places to put wheelie bins, and toilets there, you know, opening directly into kitchen and dining areas. It's, I think, you know, and a fairly, I have to say, in my opinion, a fairly uninspiring design. Whilst I understand the need for you know, affordable housing, and of course I support that, it just seemed that the costs have been cut to a bare bone here. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. We have a motion on the table for proposed by Councillor O'Neill, seconded by Councillor Lequaverdine, to accept the officer's recommendation and grant this application. Before I go to the vote, I'd just like to speak to Councillor Davies. Councillor Davies, have you been able to observe the screen to see the presentation? Are you content that you've seen the presentation and that you're happy to vote on this motion?
No, I'm not. I didn't see it at the beginning, so I'll refrain from voting.
Thank you. So I shall now take a vote. I'll call out each councillor's name and ask you to state whether you're voting for the motion, against the motion, or abstaining. So there seems to be some feedback. Has someone got me on in the background? Yeah. Okay. So, Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Barron.
For.
Councillor Bartlett.
Abstain.
Councillor Davey. Councillor Dunlop.
Councillor, I missed the first few minutes of the presentation from Mr. Evans through technical issues, so I don't think I should vote.
Thank you. Councillor Hall.
For.
Councillor Hilliard. Councillor Hilliard. Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Kelsey.
For.
Councillor Miller.
For.
Councillor Stribley. Councillor Stribley. Councillor Trent.
For.
Can I go back to Councillor Hilliard? And Councillor Stribley. Okay. And myself, Councillor Bull, I should vote for. So, Councillor Hilliard is there, Councillor Stribley. I'm assuming both of you have dropped off, so we won't be able to record your votes.
Chairman, Chris Harrod here. Just to confirm, I don't appear to have a vote from Councillor Le Poitevin.
She seconded the motion. So, Councillor Le Poitevin?
I assume the fact that I seconded the motion will vote, but
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that application, the permission has been granted, and we shall move on to the next application. I'll just give the officers a few minutes to prepare their presentation.
So just to confirm, that was 10 votes for, 3 abstentions, and 2 that were not able to vote, as we were not able to hear from them.
Thank you, Mr. Harrod. So moving on to Fairley.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. It's Simon Gould here. Hopefully you should be seeing the presentation for Fairley coming on your screens now. Chairman, can you confirm when that appears?
Yes, I can see it. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next item on today's agenda is in respect of a property known as Fairley, which resides at 16 Westcliff Road in the Westcliff area of Bournemouth. Members will have read the report and seen the written deputation that has come in over the last couple of days by third parties. It's not my intention to rehearse the whole report, but to provide members with a brief slideshow showing the proposals in the context. The scheme before you comprises an existing 3-storey purpose-built block of flats, and this application seeks permission for a roof extension to provide an additional storey to create a 4-storey building, and in doing so it will add 3 extra flats to the development, resulting in a total of 12 flats. In addition, the existing windows in the building will be replaced, and the building will be reclad to give it a new lick of life, some modernisation. And in addition to that, there will be the creation of some additional car parking spaces and the erection of a cycle store. Moving on to the slide, the presentation. The slide before members at the moment, I'll just put the application site into some context. So the application property is the property you see with the red star over it. To the south of the site, we'll see there's an area of open green shortly. Then we've got the cliff top, obviously dropping down below that to the beaches and the sea. To the west of the site, we have Westcliff Gardens, which comprises in the main period buildings ranging in height between 3 and 4 stories. Most of these buildings have sort of semi-basement levels that present themselves at ground floor level. Moving round to the north of the site, immediately behind, we have this property here, which is Avon House, and I'll come to that again in a moment. We've got the Durley roundabout. This site to the north is currently being redeveloped, and it's the site of the former Wessex Hotel. And then as we drop round to the east again, we've got a more historic urban grain. The green shaded area that wraps around the west, the north and the east of the application site and its immediate neighbours shows the area that is within the Pool Hill and Westcliff Conservation Area. So the application site and its immediate neighbours are not currently within a conservation area, although members will have noted in the report that there are plans to bring this site and its immediate neighbours into the conservation area. That has been going through consultation, but it hasn't been formally adopted yet, although the officer does give it some weight in her report. Moving to some aerial photographs, here we see the application building, Westcliff Gardens immediately to the left. Members will note the line of sort of vegetation that runs along the boundary that forms a good screen. Similarly, along the eastern boundary, again, we see some vegetation. Immediately behind, we have Avon House, which is referenced in a lot of the representation that's been received. That is an 11-storey building. Immediately to the east of Avon House, we have Tower Court, which is a purpose-built 13-storey block of flats. Immediately to the south of Tower Court, we have Bayview Gardens, which is a 6-storey purpose-built block of flats. And then obviously we've got the existing building, which is 3 stories. This is a slightly closer, a slightly more grainy look at the existing building. The building is not particularly spectacular in terms of its architectural merit, but it is of its time. Moving on to the next slide, we've come round now to Westcliff Road. This street scene shows the existing access into the development, which is a shared access arrangement with Avon House. So vehicles enter the site at this point here. They pass the frontage of Avon House towards the eastern boundary, and then they move down to the rear. Here we've got Fairley, and then this is the parking area that is proposed for the residential development. This is a slightly closer look at the access. So we've come down the side of Avon House here. We sweep round to the right. Members will note there's 4 existing car parking spaces, and the proposals result in the creation of an additional 6. So that's 10 in total. Here's the bike store that will be referred to. It does result in the removal of 2 small trees, but these are low category trees. Looking at a photograph or a street scene of the existing car park. So on the left we've got Fairley, the existing 3-storey building. We've come down the side of Avon House, which is this building on the right, and now we're going to sweep round into the car park. There's 4 existing car parking spaces here, and the proposals will eat into a section of this soft landscaping area here. The trees that have been noted to be removed are these smaller trees here that have lost their leaves during the winter months, and there's a small area of soft landscaping beyond that. These 3 photographs, starting with the top left, we've come slightly back on ourselves now. This is the side elevation of Avon House. So we travel down the eastern side of Avon House. There we see Fairley as we approach it. At the bottom left picture, we're in the car parking area now for Fairley, and we've turned around and we're essentially looking at the route that would lead us back out up the side of Avon House towards Westcliff Road. And finally, the top right image shows where the bike store will be situated on this area of soft landscaping. So this will be, a section of this will be removed to facilitate the bike store and some of the additional parking. Moving on to the proposed elevations, we've got the west and the east elevations. This is as the proposals would look. So members will note that the appearance of the building is changing. There's a more modern appearance that is proposed, and I'll come on to the materials shortly. Members will note that the design seeks to broadly mimic the existing building. There are some subtle differences in the proportions of the windows, but officers wouldn't suggest that this is harmful in any way. Moving on to the next slide, we're now looking at the main front and rear elevations. Starting with the top image, we've got the south elevation, which is the elevation that faces towards the sea. And then at the bottom image, we've got the north elevation, which is the elevation that faces towards the rear elevation of Avon House. I'll draw members' attention to the top floor windows, which are marked OG, obscure glazed, and these windows here, which are angled windows that pick up from the existing angled windows that serve habitable rooms on the building. This would have been designed into the original scheme, obviously to avert that view away from the rear of Avon House. But notwithstanding that, members are reminded that there is a 30-metre separation gap between the two buildings. That's a distance that would exceed guidance in the local plan and the design guides for Bournemouth area. The floor plan, moving on to the proposed top floor plan, the top part of the plan where our cursor is, that is the elevation that faces Avon House. Here we can see those obscure glazed windows that serve the en-suites. Here we can see the angled windows serving the bedrooms. There are two clear glazed windows that do face directly towards Avon House. But as members will note, these windows do not serve habitable living accommodation. They serve the circulatory stairwell spaces. This is a fairly simple plan showing the proposed bike store, fairly well designed, good use of materials. And finally, another image of the north elevation that faces the rear of Avon House, but here we can see the materials that are proposed. So predominantly render with the use of a complementary contrasting stone cladding, and then the grey aluminium framed windows and fascias, all designed to give the building a new lease of life, but in a complementary way that sits in comfortably in the context of the locality. And that's the reason why I've gone back to this slide, Chairman, just to give members a flavour that actually render is widely used in this area, lightly coloured materials. So in that respect, the building will sit comfortably. Officers are happy in terms of the relationship to neighbouring properties. There's adequate separation distances, as you can see. The building will remain subservient in height to most of its neighbours, and in some instances, some of the relationships that exist, such as the relationship between Tower Court and Bayview Gardens, we have similar distances there, or even smaller distances than would be created, that would exist or currently exist between Fairley and its immediate neighbours. So on that basis, Chairman, the officer's recommendation is to grant.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. I would like now to refer to the statements received. We have had a number of statements, written statements. In objection from A&H Paddlewicks, Brian Thomas, D.F. Almond, Joanne Kirby, Katie Brooks, Kenneth and Helen Young, Rosemary and Richard Dixon, David and Anna Widowson, Alan Hunter, Edward O'Toole, Norman Todd, Roger Strutt, Suzanne Williams, Werner Barker. In support, we have had a written statement from the planning agent, and we've also had a statement from Ward Councillor John Beasley. Unless anyone indicates, I will assume that committee members have received these statements and have taken them into account. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. This has got to be one of the most unusual situations in a planning application that I've come across in all the years I've been on planning committees, in as much as this extra story and extra height brings it closer to the character of the area rather than destroys the character of the area. To me, it's an improvement on what's there, and it's slightly more keeping in keeping with the area. So you know, this is almost a red letter day for developments, because normally you know, developers are pushing it beyond what is generally acceptable in the area, but this one appears to be actually getting closer to what at least is on the western side of it, and it's still substantially shorter than the other surrounding developments. So personally, I would support that without any problem.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. Several of the letters were of the same format, and they referred to council policies on distance and number of parking, etc. Could the officer just confirm about the reference to those policies, the Bournemouth policies, and how the application meets those? Thanks.
Mr. Gould.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, thank you, Councillor Hilliard. Starting with the separation distances, there are a number of comments made in that respect from third-party representation. You will recall, as part of the presentation, I showed you this photograph. Obviously, we wouldn't measure from that photograph, but from the plans, you know, we can inform members that that separation distance remains at 30 metres. So the Bournemouth design guidance would suggest that once you get above 3 stories, you're really looking at a separation distance, a minimum separation distance of 25 metres. So we are in excess of that. In terms of the relationship to Avon House, some of the comments that have been received also refer to Tower Court, which is the 13, so it's the tallest block of flats. That building is obviously to the northeast of Fairley. Our design guidance would normally want about 12 metres in a sort of side relationship, side to back relationship, or as I've said, 25 metres when you're talking of buildings of this height in terms of a sort of front to back or back to back relationship. The distance to that building is slightly less, but obviously we have to be mindful of the fact that that's an oblique relationship. That's not a direct relationship like we have between Avon House and Fairley. We're also mindful of the intervening boundary screening, which is fairly substantial along both the western and the eastern boundaries. In terms of the car parking, there is a slight error in the report, Chairman. Paragraph 29 refers to an additional 4 parking spaces. I think that was picked up in some of the representation. The facts are that there are 10 car parking spaces in total that will be, if this development goes ahead, and there are 4 at present. So obviously that's a net gain of 6. And that's actually reflected in paragraph 2 of your officer's report in the table, where it shows that the existing is 4 and the proposed is 10, so obviously the net gain of 6. That's in line with the Bournemouth parking SPD. It's been assessed by your highway officers and is found to be acceptable in this sort of town centre location. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks for that clarification.
Are you finished, Mr. Hilliard? Councillor Hilliard?
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it's an like this one which I've walked as I did with Cynthia House area. It's significant in that it's sea facing, this development, on one side, whilst on the other there are two tower blocks of flats, one being 10, 11 stories and the other 13 stories. Both the exteriors of those blocks are of a fairly muted design representative of their period. On the fourth side are the rear of the buildings of Whitecliff Gardens, and the backs of those, which are fairly close to their rear boundary and are largely or partly obscured by trees. However, the distancing between all of those developments is, I think, well considered and certainly within boundary or within acceptability. So spacing between Fairley and the surrounding buildings is, in my opinion, very good, and the exterior treatment of the proposal is a marked improvement on the existing. I think also that the parking, bike storage and bin storage is reasonable, fairly well considered, especially when one links it within the site size and the layout. Therefore, I do not see a problem on this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Davies, do you wish to speak? You're on the phone, so.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with this. I like the councillor walked and had a look at it, and I think it is an improvement on the existing one, so I'm very happy with it.
Thank you, Councillor. I have no other requests to speak on this. Does anybody wish to propose?
I will propose it. I'm happy to. I spent time looking at it.
Councillor O'Neill, happy to second.
Thank you, councillors. Do any officers want to come back before we go to the vote? Mr. Gould, are you happy?
Happy, Chairman.
Thank you. So the same process as before. For, against or abstain. Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bartlett. For. Councillor Barron.
For.
Councillor Dunlop.
For.
Councillor Hall. Councillor Hall. You're muted, Councillor.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hilliard.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Kelsey.
For.
Councillor Le Poivredin.
For.
Councillor Miller.
For.
Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor O'Neill.
For.
Councillor Stridley.
My son didn't come back until halfway through the presentation, so I have to abstain.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Trent.
For.
And myself, Councillor Bull, for. Thank you, Mr. Howard.
Thank you, Chairman. So that's 14 for and 1 abstention.
So that application is passed and permission is granted. I should just give a few moments for the officers to get prepared for the next application, which is Bourne Valley Community Centre. Okay, Mr. Evans, when you're ready.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just check that you can hear me? I had started there, but unfortunately my mic was muted. If I can just get a confirmation that you can now hear me.
I can hear you and I can see the presentation. If anybody can't see the presentation, can they RTS in the screen, please?
Chairman, thank you. So again, Bourne Valley Community Centre, site of former Bourne Valley Community Centre. Proposal is to erect two-storey blocks of flats, so a total of 24 flats, but also including some communal facilities within those blocks. The purpose of the accommodation being to provide temporary accommodation for persons moving out of other less salubrious accommodation on their as they move from being homeless towards having permanent accommodation. The application is again by the Pool Housing Partnership. Again, just to give you a general location, Herbert Avenue being a busy arterial road that links Ringwood Road, where we were with the previous application, and Alder Road, so a busy thoroughfare. The site itself, previously occupied by a community centre, single-storey building, now demolished, and you can see the residue of that, the site having now been cleared, and again the hard surfacing associated with that, and the balance of the site being coarse grassland and scrub. The land to the north, the adjacent sports site, is associated with the nearby St Joseph Roman Catholic Primary School, which we'll come back to, which is just off the top right-hand corner, beyond the top right corner of the photograph, beyond Herbert Avenue. But it's therefore solely used by them, but is separate from their main campus. It's essentially a flat site, but the site does fall away to the rear as it drops down towards nearby homes in Connaught Crescent and Central Avenue. I'll draw your attention at this point, particularly to the, as well as the falling levels away from the site, to the very substantial tree screen that there is on that sloping land. And as I said I would, if I can just draw your attention, the bottom right-hand corner of the photograph, which is the playground and principal campus of St Joseph's School on Sansweed Road. The entrance to the site off Herbert Avenue, just draw your attention to the existing cycle lane, existing footpath and verge. This was previously the access to the community centre and will be recycled, be reused again as the access into the proposed development. Again, I take this opportunity in this image to draw your attention to the significant tree screen around the side and rear of the site, and again the boundary to the St Joseph's School playing field beyond the green fence on the right hand side. So the proposals, 2 blocks, total of 24 flats comprising 1, 2 and 3 beds, but I draw attention to the balance of that, predominantly 2 and 3 bedroom units, so intended for primarily family occupation. 3 of the individual units, a 1 bed, a 2 bed and a 3 bed on the ground floor, in this area here, we'll come back to that, but in this area of the ground floor of this block, are designed to be accessible. The intention is that the accommodation would be 100% retained for affordable accommodation for persons as they move from being homeless. And I think and what that in reality means is persons who are probably prior to being accommodated here in bed and breakfast or other less appropriate accommodation, and they would be in this accommodation if permitted. The suggestion in the report that you've seen is between 6 months and 24 months. The intention is 6 months would probably be the minimum as people are assessed in terms of their housing needs and in terms of the availability of alternative accommodation, permanent accommodation that they move to. But there's a recognition that there may be circumstances when that may stretch to up to 24 months. When, for instance, the availability of specialist units coming forward, and I'd remind you there are accessible units within this scheme. So there's a suggestion that certain residents may take a little bit longer to find permanent accommodation for, so up to 24 months is within the provision. In terms of the facilities associated with the development, top right hand corner, just your attention, not very clear in the drawing, but the bin stores to serve all the units within an enclosure here, bike store within the green circle, drying area to the rear, and the car parking off that existing access along the boundary, separating the building from the boundary, with the green fence you saw in the photograph, which is beyond which is the St Joseph's School playing field. Moving to the built form of the buildings, a monopitch type of building, the highest element away from the car parking area and towards the edges of the site as it backs onto the falling levels with the tree screen down to Central Avenue and Connaught Crescent. If I could just sort of give you an indication of the separation distances from the backs of the two-storey accommodation to the nearby homes in Central Avenue, minimum of about 25 metres up to about 30 metres because of the increasing separation along the street. And similarly in Connaught Crescent, a little bit more, with something of the order of a minimum of 30 metres up to 40 metres from the rear elevation of the accommodation down to the rear elevation of the, in the case of Connaught Crescent, primarily bungalows, I believe. Again, those separation distances are significant, but also significantly enhanced in terms of the separation by the intervening tree screen. Again, just to emphasise that tree screen, which is a particular feature of this site. Again, the separation, as I said, 25 to 30 metres down to the rear of the homes in Central Avenue, 30 to 40 metres because of the oblique nature of the block at the bottom end of the site from the bungalows in Connaught Crescent. And coming back to the built form of the buildings, brick with render panels, a monopitch membrane roof, and I particularly draw your attention to this feature. So access on block A, and it's exactly the same on block B. They are essentially mirror images, or sorry, are essentially the same building apart from some of the internal layout. Access to the first floor via an external staircase, which is roofed, but is not enclosed. So that is the elements up to a decked access, external access to the, in this case, the 4 units on the top floor. So no internal circulation space, communal circulation space. Each of the units has effectively a front door out onto the external circulation space. Excuse me. Block A. This is the block nearest to Herbert Avenue, and if I could again just reiterate the point about the nature of some of the accommodation. The blue circle identifying a 1-bed, a 2-bed and a 3-bed accessible unit, so handy for the car parking nearest to the access, and the red circle identifying the one piece of non-residential accommodation on the site, which comprises an office, an interview room, a waiting area associated with the office and interview room, and the rear half of that unit providing a laundrette effectively, and a shared, I assume, storage area. So facilities that might otherwise have been accommodated within the envelope of the individual flats, provided communally because of the particular nature of the accommodation being provided, and with a supervised element because of the office associated with the management of the scheme. Again, Block B, very similar to Block A, but with wholly accommodating flats rather than including the management suite and communal spaces. Let me just go back to that point about the communal space. It's already come up in connection with an earlier application about the floor areas of these units. I have to say that a number of them fall below the standard, as I understand it, and in fact in some instances fall below the 20% less standard. However, in mitigation against that, I'd suggest that some of the facilities that would normally be expected to be provided within that floor area, like storage, like the laundrette type facilities, the washing and drying facilities, are provided communally because of the nature of the accommodation. And I'd suggest that, or I'd invite you to bear that in mind when considering both the nature of the accommodation being provided, the purpose of the accommodation, and its relationship to national advisory standards. Chairman, the intention of this accommodation, well, this accommodation tends to be a particular and particularly pressing need, and as I've highlighted, the scheme falls short in a number of respects. I'll come back to one of those in a moment. In a number of respects, in terms of the space, and let me just go back to something I've missed out, which is important: car parking. The scheme has a shortfall of about 6 spaces on the required car parking standard. Sorry for going past this slide without mentioning that. Yes, I think 25 spaces proposed. Let me pause myself momentarily while I check that. Sorry, 15 spaces proposed. The standard for this mix of 1-bed, 2-bed, 3-bed accommodation, if you apply the owner-occupied accommodation parking standards, would require 21 spaces. So a theoretical shortfall of 6 car parking spaces. There is provision for bicycle storage, the green area in the centre, and it is on a transportation link with good access to bus routes, for instance. It is nevertheless a mathematical shortfall in car parking, and Transportation Services, the Highway Authority, have maintained an objection to the scheme, primarily on the grounds of highway safety, relating to the additional traffic movements that might be generated by residents with cars driving around nearby streets seeking a parking space, Herbert Avenue itself not being available for car parking. So it will potentially, if these units were all occupied, and if the same level of car ownership accrue to these units as would accrue to normal 1-bed, 2-bed, and 3-bedroom family housing, there would be a theoretical shortfall in car parking. Having said that, let me take you back to my final point, which was that there is a particular need for this kind of accommodation. There is a pressing need. It falls short in terms of the space in some respects as to what would be expected in permanent accommodation. It falls short in car parking provision relative to were these flats for owner occupation. I'd invite you to weigh those deficiencies against the benefits of the scheme in terms of providing much needed accommodation for persons moving from being homeless towards moving towards permanent accommodation. Chairman, having said that, the recommendation is to delegate to the head of planning. You'll have seen this amendment in your addendum sheet. Delegate the head of plan to approve upon securing the necessary SAM payments associated with the scheme and subject the conditions set out in your agenda papers. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Now I now refer to the following written statements which have been received. In objection, Andrew Hill, Shaquan Tang, Duncan Newman, Joe Keating, Kate Trott, Mrs. Elliott, Michelle Bow, Mr. and Mrs. Baker, Mr. and Mrs. Clark, Jean and Michael Ford, P. Light, P. Seeley, Stuart King, W. Batten, and from Ward Councillor Lily Earle. Unless anyone indicates otherwise, I will assume that all committee members have received these statements and have taken them into account. Okay, I've got a number of requests to speak. Can I check if this is in relation to speaking on the item or speaking on not seeing the presentations? Councillor Trent.
Have you just called me?
Are you speaking on the item or on not receiving the...
No, speaking on the item.
Okay, can you... I'll call you in a minute. Councillor McCormack?
Speaking on the item.
And Councillor Miller?
Yeah, speaking on the item. Sorry.
Lovely, thank you. So I'll go back and start with Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. This has been hanging around for a long time, and there were a lot of objections, but many of them were actually based on some misreporting in the local media. To start off with, they identified the wrong site and put a photograph up of a different site. They also made it out as if it was going to be for single people, ex-offenders, and all sorts of things like that, which was complete nonsense. And there were issues like overlooking as if somehow the people living there would be any different to the people that overlook the school playing fields that live in Rossmore Road in two-storey houses. Overall, I support this scheme, and it was only over the last few months that I actually was helping someone out who this scheme would have actually have helped them find accommodation. They were needing accommodation through no fault of their own, and you know, they had children at school in the area and were being sent to a bed and breakfast the other side of the conurbation. And eventually they were found somewhere closer, and you know, there is a need there for this kind of accommodation, but a few things that I think do concern me, and that's whether we can word the permission in a way that actually says that this is an exception. This isn't sort of like a normal speculative development, because I would hate this level of density to be used then to justify other housing of a more permanent nature that is too dense. There's oh God, I lost my thread. Yeah, it is of a temporary nature. It is for people who are in transit from one type of accommodation to another, and they are families. So I can't go along with the expressions of concern about the, you know, somehow it's going to be filled with undesirables. In appearance, it's actually quite similar to an existing development further up Herbert Avenue called Herbert Court, where you've got one side that the doors are access from a veranda type of thing, and so it is actually, it has similarities with something which has been existing along Herbert Avenue for a long time. A few things do sort of puzzle me, and it only really dawned on me when you were showing the plans that the roofs slope to the north, whereas it would have struck me that it should have sloped to the south so that they could have put solar panels and made it a little bit more environmentally sustainable. That is an area which does, you know, it puzzles me a little bit. On aspects like access to public transport, many people in the desperate situation that the people moving in here would be in, and let's compare it to the bed and breakfast they would have had, aren't necessarily going to be car owners, And one of the objections made a point about poor public transport links. Well, just a stone's throw away, you've got the 7-day-a-week, every 30 minutes, number 17 route, and a short distance in the opposite direction, you've got the number 16 route. So you've actually got a 15-minute service minimum in the area. So I support this, but I would like an officer's comments on how this permission can be presented that doesn't make people say, well, you've allowed it there, you've got to allow it somewhere else. It's a different type of accommodation, and it needs to be highlighted as such and not being seen as a precedent for denser or smaller accommodation elsewhere. But on the plus side, it stays within 2 stories. It is well screened from the people that are below it in Connaught Crescent and so on. So, as I say, personally, I do support the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. Of course, every application is taken on its own merit. I don't know if Mr. Evans wants to come back on that.
Chairman, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. The recommendation before you is unique and explicit to this particular scheme with this particular development for this particular purpose and use. It would not create precedent for considering other types of application differently to how we would normally deal with them. I'd suggest it's an unusual, possibly unique development to come before this committee, and you should deal with it on that basis.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. The scheme on a whole, in my is a little bit cramped, but given the nature of the accommodation being temporary, I don't think that's a huge issue. On condition 3, where it talks about temporary accommodation, that's kind of a little bit open-ended. I was wondering if we could change the condition to say temporary accommodation, perhaps, and then in brackets less than 2 years. Maybe the officer might want to comment on that.
Chairman, normally we would be very much inclined. We would very much encourage you to write conditions that are enforceable, precise, explicit. That's slightly vague. It's because the term temporary has been left slightly vague by the applicant. So it's 6 months is what everyone is aiming for. These are seen as temporary accommodation. They're a stepping stone between nowhere to live and somewhere permanent to live. And so there's no expectation that that will go much beyond the 6 months, several months perhaps beyond that. As I say, the one in looking to impose some kind of rigorous time limit on it, the concern is that, for instance, with the it might be particularly the case with the accessible units, the throughput of accessibility and availability of accessible units may not be quite as high, and therefore someone requiring an accessible unit may be in this accommodation a little bit longer, waiting for adjustments to be made to other accommodation or an appropriate already modified unit to come forward. So I think putting a specific time, I think the nature of the consent is explicit. These are for temporary occupation. The ownership of the land, which is BCP Council, the intended developers, which are Pool Housing Partnership, taking those things together, I suggest that a condition is probably unnecessary because it's actually the intention of all of those interested parties, involved parties, to get people out of this accommodation well within the 2-year period. And I would not want us to be coming back at a later date because one individual or whatever has not been able to be rehoused outside of that 24 months, and perhaps even talking about enforcement against the owners or the occupiers. I think the slightly vague, open-ended condition is a statement of intent, and the nature of the owners and the operators are such that we would not need to be more precise than that.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Councillor McCormack, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I don't think we can take the ownership of the land into consideration. I think that's a material planning consideration. I've been in the housing industry for right over 10 years, and it's my experience that perhaps sometimes a temporary accommodation does need that extra level of clarity on the condition.
Chairman, if I could come back on that. Chairman, if the council is minded to pursue that, whilst I would, as I say, initially advise against it, if the council was minded to do that, I would suggest perhaps a slightly more generous interpretation of temporary then, just to make sure that anything that slips beyond that 24 months, if there were instances when that occurred, would not automatically put the building in breach of planning, the planning condition. Therefore, if members are minded to put a time limit on it, I suggest it needs to be a little bit more generous than 24 months.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Councillor McCormick, have you finished?
That's fine, thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you very much, Chair. I know the site well. We've seen the site before on Poole Borough Council. I think this application builds on some really strong work that's been done between Poole Borough Council and the Housing Partnership before. Look, let's be really clear. This is really needed. It's hugely needed. This is for vulnerable people and families. And I think this actually, there is some argument around it being cramped. But I think it will still provide excellent accommodation at a time when it's really needed. The fact that it's got really good transport links and the type of accommodation it is satisfies me on the shortfall on the parking. I thought the ward councillor Miliel's statement was really very useful as a summary as well. So that's very helpful. And just a quick point on that, Chairman. I'm not sure if I missed it, but at the beginning I believe you said you were reading out objections, and just to be clear that the one of those statements was from the ward councillor, which was in support of the application. So overall, I understand the argument being put across here. I'm very happy to support it, and we'll be happy to propose this as and when we've gone through the debate. Thank you.
Chairman, Anne Stribley, I'm sorry to jump in, but every time I put RTS, I get cut off. So could you call me at some time to speak? Thank you.
I will do, Councillor. Just to get back on Councillor Mellor's point, yes, I confirm that Councillor Earl was speaking in favour of the application. Thank you. Councillor Le Poitevin.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Trent is quite right. This has been around as a proposal or an idea in the offing for a long time. Prior to last year's elections, this site was actually in Branksome West Ward, so I was the ward councillor, and I remember a briefing on these proposals at least 2 years ago, and since that the scheme has remained virtually unchanged. It was brought to Poole Council in October 2018 with a predicted timescale which would have indicated completion of the project by now, before now. So I've been very disappointed that there seem to have been delays for I don't know what reason, because as I say, the scheme is basically unchanged from what I was first told about more than 2 years ago. Anyway, that's really an aside. I fully support this application. It is provided absolutely desperately needed accommodation for people at a very trying time of their lives, in their family life. We were done. The proposal was done a great disservice by the local press, who in first running an article on the planning application, in the same article or very close by, immediately started talking about the scale of rough sleeping and the problems of rough sleeping, only implying, I have to say, but making it, reading between the lines, that this accommodation was earmarked for that sort of circumstance, which it clearly is not. This is for families, essentially, couples, some individuals, people who are probably now in perfectly good accommodation, but for some reason, maybe the landlord wants to reclaim it, maybe there's a fire or something, or maybe for whatever reason they have to move out and need temporary accommodation while they get back on their feet. And this is 100 times better than bed and breakfast, which is totally unsuitable, particularly for families with children who are very often crammed into one room. Imagine children of secondary age trying to do their homework, parents around, younger siblings. It's a nightmare. And added to that, of course, it's a huge cost on the council or to provide bed and breakfast accommodation is not viable for the people in the accommodation nor for the council. So everything we can do to keep people out of that is a benefit all round. Coming back to the point raised by Councillor McCormack and the time limit, I would hate to think that because an arbitrary time limit has been reached, that a family is given their marching orders through no fault of their own. Obviously, if a family has been putting up objections and not been willing to accept perfectly sensible accommodation, that's a different matter. But if there is some particular reason, particularly if it's specialist accommodation that's needed, and it hasn't been able to be found, I would hate to see people, as I say, turfed out because they've reached an arbitrary time limit on their tenancy. So I'm very happy to support this. I know a lot of my residents have objected to it, but I'm sure it is almost entirely because of the misleading publicity in the Echo that gave entirely the wrong picture of what this is aimed at. And I'm particularly upset that the school, of all people, did not see the benefits of this scheme. As my colleague pointed out, there could well be people in this accommodation whose children go to that very school, and to paint them, everybody using this with the worst possible brush is just, to me, totally unacceptable. And I will echo what Councillor Mellor said. When it comes to the appropriate time, I'd be very happy to second this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. Many years ago, we were clearly taught that planning was about building and not about social engineering. This is an application for a block of flats in a perfectly good location. I see no planning reasons to refuse it at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to ask Councillor Davies, as you're on the phone, whether you wish to speak on this at all.
No, you know, the people that, you know, the councillors who are representing the area know it better than I do. The only concern that I have is, like, you know, Councillor Trent, is the size. But I realise that if the people are only going to be there for 6 months, I think Councillor McCormack thinking 2 years, I think I would be a little bit worried if people are in that small accommodation for that duration of time, because I think now we can see with the problems that we've got that you know, that the people are now saying that people are getting mental problems because they're cooped up, and I think, golly, if they were in this situation in there, then it could be a problem. But I can see that it's got wonderful advantages, but I would hope that it would be for a shorter period of time. There's the 6 months has been mentioned, but I will agree to support it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bartlett.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Of course, if we had enough social housing, we wouldn't have to have temporary housing like this, which is a real issue. But there are a number of issues that concern me. But the first point I want to ask the planning officer is there a separate category of planning regulation applying to this type of building, as opposed to, or does it just come under the standard residential accommodation planning rules?
Chairman, for the purposes of this application, we've dealt with it as if it were a conventional block of flats. It's not been dealt with as a hostel or anything unusual. The standards that have been applied to it and the expectations have been as if they were flats of this size, without regard to the nature of the tenure.
Thank you for that, because I think if this was a regular block of flats, we probably would be looking at refusing it based on the minimum space, national minimum space requirements, the lack of car parking, the poor design, it looks like a couple of lean-tos to me, and overall, and in particular, the density of the accommodation on the site. There are a number of fairly significant reasons why, if this was a normal application, residential accommodation, it would probably be turned down. However, most people have said that they understand the need for temporary accommodations, a desperate need for it, and therefore we've got to find some way of housing people that are already in bed and breakfast, etc. But of course, we've already had a lot of experience of this, particularly in Bournemouth, where a huge amount of money was borrowed, and residential houses in the main have been purchased to accommodate people who require temporary accommodation. I think it's somewhere in the order of £46 million has been earmarked, and there's a programme of buying a lot of ex-council houses, detached houses, and regular type of accommodation that's available on the free market. Of course, the problem with that is it's much more expensive to do it that way rather than do it in the way that's being proposed here. So I've got a bit of a dichotomy here, because whilst I really understand the need for this housing, one of the concerns I have is that temporary accommodation is not always that temporary. Because when you think about it, the people will come into this accommodation, and if there aren't social housing or other housing available for them, where are they going to go? And we've already seen, I think, where temporary housing bought in the past has progressively filled up to the point where they can't move on because there's nowhere else for them to go. And so temporary housing tends to become sort of semi-permanent. And if you ask most people if they think that 2 years is temporary accommodation, they'd probably say, actually, 2 years is not. So you've got to look at the potential for people living in this accommodation for 2 years. And it may well be that some will stay longer. So then you've got to ask about the quality of the accommodation that they're being put in. And is it adequate for families with children to live in the density of accommodation with no amenity space to speak of, inadequate parking, and families do have cars, and they will need to park them. For those that haven't, from my understanding, the bus routes are not particularly sustainable. That's what I've been led to believe. So there are quite a lot of issues about this, I think on balance, and it would be an on-balance decision based on the desperate need for temporary accommodation, then I would have to support it. I just could not turn it down on that basis. But I would say that we're probably stretching the boundaries of the planning system in order to accommodate this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Evans, did you want to come back? Or you?
Chairman, only on this point, I mean, clearly there is concern being voiced about the nature of the accommodation, the amount of accommodation on site, the car parking situation, and Councillor McCormack has highlighted the condition, the slightly vague condition about. Let me just remind you what it says in there. It shall only be used as temporary accommodation for those people qualifying for affordable housing and on the council's housing register, and for no other form of residential accommodation. And I think the explanation of that condition goes to the heart of it. And the reason is due to the importance applied to this form of tenure, the limited internal and external space, and the low numbers of parking spaces provided, and in accordance with the relevant policy. I think that's the recognition that if this were not for the intended purpose that it is, we may be perhaps looking at it slightly differently, but it is for that purpose, and therefore I think I can give the committee some assurance that that condition is robust enough, given the likely management pattern of this building. That condition is robust enough to ensure that it will remain being used for the purpose intended, and it will not create a precedent for other let's say more standard residential schemes that seek to push the envelope in a similar way. And I hope the members will take some comfort from the explanation in that condition. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor McCormack.
I think Councillor Kelsey was before me.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, you're above and underneath them. Yes, Councillor Kelsey.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to Councillor Cormack for letting me come in. I'm glad Mr. Evans just gave us that qualification on the reading of that method just now. I fully agree with him on that. I've heard many other people speak on this one today, and I'm glad to see that within the application it clearly states that these properties will be for people on our council waiting list, which I think is absolutely essential. We do have a desperate need for this accommodation, and I'm prepared to support this application because I think the needs far outweigh the negatives that come with it, i.e. the size of the accommodation, the lack of parking, etc. I think the needs of this are far, far greater at this time. So I'm happy to support this. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCormack.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back and clarify my comments on the condition. That was to future-proof the nature of this building going forward, not to kick people out at the two-year mark. So with that said, I'd be happy to make a move to grant this, a proposal to grant this.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I ask for a seconder, I'm going to call Councillor Barron, who wishes to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate the letters of objection that I received. Having said that, we are looking at extreme circumstances here. If I was to put myself in the situation of having young children and being homeless and stuck in a bed and breakfast, sharing a bathroom and that kind of thing, I personally know where I'd rather have my family, which would be in, albeit a small, apartment like this. So I will be supporting this application. I agree that I think there's already a motion on the table from Councillor Mellor. But I think Marion hit me to the post, but I would be happy to second that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Neill.
I actually did have a question, but in summary, I agree entirely with what Councillor Bartlett was saying. I mean, if this was other residents or other purpose, I would have no hesitation in refusing it. I was concerned that it sets a dangerous precedent for the future, but I think Doug Evans' comments reassured me on that, so no further question.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, now as someone who's worked with the homeless and seen the standard of the B&Bs that some of these poor families are put into, there is no question that despite how small some of these are, they're far preferable to any of the B&Bs for families. I think they'd much rather take a bit of difficulty with us getting into town than staying in some of the places that they would otherwise be. So I have absolutely no hesitation in supporting this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Now I have, according to my notes, a motion put forward by Councillor Mellor and seconded by Councillor Lepoivre to support this application. Can you both confirm that's correct, Councillor Mellor?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
And
yes, that's correct.
Lovely, thank you. So again, I should take a vote. Just check with the officer whether he wants to come back on anything before we go to that.
Chairman, it was just to remind you of the amendment to the recommendation, that the recommendation before you is to delegate to the Chief Planning Officer to grant permission upon the securing of the necessary SAM payments associated with the scheme. The report says that they have been secured. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible to get that sorted today, so it is delegate to approve upon the having secured the SAM contributions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. So I shall now go to the vote. Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bartlett. Councillor Bartlett.
Yes, for.
Thank you. Councillor Barron.
For.
Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Dunlop.
Most definitely for.
Councillor Hall. Councillor Hall. Thank you. Councillor Hilliard.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Kelsey.
For.
Councillor Lepoivre.
For.
Councillor Miller?
4.
Councillor O'Neill?
4.
Councillor Stribley?
4.
Councillor Trent?
4.
And myself, Councillor Bull, 4.
Thank you, Chair. That's unanimous.
Thank you. So that application is granted for the head of planning to grant in due course. Thank you. Now I'm going to adjourn for a 10-minute comfort break.
Board, please.
Okay,
that looks good. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, so this is a application for works on a small piece of land just north of the A35 and to create a pedestrian access and form a pathway just north of the A35. For the general location of the site, this is Christchurch Town Centre towards the bottom of the site, Waitrose and its car park, the A35 here, and just off to the left the site which the members considered at the February meeting on the former police station magistrates court. You'll see the reference in the report to the land lying within the conservation area. The site has been advertised and the necessary press notices carried out because of the location in the conservation area. It's a moot point whether, depending on the thickness of the line, this line comes from the adopted conservation area appraisal document, whether the works are actually within or without the conservation area itself. Nonetheless, we're entirely satisfied that the scheme does not have any negative impacts on the character appearance of the conservation area and thereby passes the statutory test. So just some views of the site from the road. So this is at the point where there's an existing access, an existing pull-in to the site, and looking back westwards towards what you see in the white building as part of Saxon Square, and the access will be formed through this verge just to the north, just to the east there. Slightly clearer view where the works will take place. The works have been intended to take place where they won't involve a significant tree removal on the site, and through this area of scrub beyond the bridge over the river at this point. This is actually on the river looking back, so the access will come into the area here, and then this is exactly where the access will provide a route into the wider Milllands Common. You've seen reference to an existing access into the site, which is from Beaconsfield Road, and that's the end of Beaconsfield Road there, and there is a public footpath going up and then a bridge over the river at that point. This is just to show you the existing pull-in with the gate, although not part of these proposals, part of the wider HIPS scheme will install a kissing gate at this point to improve access to this wider area. And as I say, we are only dealing on this particular application with works to this small area of land in here, but this is just to give you an idea of the wider HIPS projects which will take place. The majority of these works the authority can undertake under its permitted development rights, and so it's only the fact that this area of land requires an access onto a classified road, which is the A35. Otherwise, again, the formation of the walkway and pathway would also be permitted development under the council's own PD rights. You'll see a number of issues raised in the report, Chairman, which I won't go back over, over issues such as the wider use of the land. Just to clarify that, again, we are not considering a change of use of the land. There is open access to the land currently. We're simply looking at an application for works for this area within the red line. And also you'll see that we've sought to address within the report and as part of the update the issues about disabled access and the Equalities Act as part of the works. And we just draw your attention to the wider proposals as part of the HIPS, which is not intended to provide fully ambient accessible paths, and the purpose of the HIPS, of course, is to divert usage away from the sensitive sites, which similarly are not set up at St Catherine's Hill, for example, protected heathland, which similarly does not have accessible paths in that way. So, Chairman, for the reasons set out in the report, the application is recommended for approval. For the purposes of the minutes, we do recommend, just for clarity, that the council, the committee, has properly considered the heritage aspect in terms of the conservation area issue, and so the wording that we would ordinarily read in the report would be as follows. I'll provide this for Mr. Harrod. And in reaching this decision, the council has had due regard to the statutory duty in section 72 of the Planning Listed Building Conservation Areas Act 1990, which states that with respect to any buildings or other land within a conservation area, special attention shall be paid to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of that area. And we're satisfied that the scheme will meet that test in this instance, Chair, and on that basis we recommend it for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. I shall now refer to the written statements which have been received. In objection from Peter Fenning, Christchurch Conservation Trust, Geoffrey Furnell, Trustee of Christchurch Commoners Association, Stephanie King, Mrs. Newman Crane. In support, Savills on behalf of the applicant, and there were none received from the ward councillors. Unless anyone indicates otherwise, I assume you've all seen these statements and will take them into account. Okay, I will now go to Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few things for clarification, please. First of all, why could we not use the existing slope rather than go to the expense of steps? And two, obviously using the kissing gate protects the animals inside, but again, just to clarify, does it meet the Equalities Act? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've just taken you to this picture. My understanding is that the existing access is on a slightly lower part of the site and is more readily prone to flooding as part of the proposals. And the idea of providing the scheme in the, I'll just go to the wider HIPS. The idea of providing the access in here is on the slightly higher ground to be able to provide access to the land on more frequent occasions, and this is an area more prone to flooding as being slightly lower, as you can see from the photograph. Yes, again, in terms of the Equalities Act, certainly where we were intending to provide as part of the proposals a fully accessible route round the site, we would need to address the issues of the accessibility, and what we're trying to do in this particular instance is simply improve access to an existing site. So because of the nature of the paths which will be provided as part of the HIPS scheme, which are simply, as you can see on this scheme, mown grass pathways, they would also not be able to be used, say, by wheelchair users. So in this particular instance, we've given very due consideration to that aspect, and we are also guided in terms of the suitability of the HIPS project by Natural England, who have given their support to the proposals, Chairman.
And if I can just come back, Chair. Why is it going to be steps and not slope? and the new access. I appreciate why we got the new access. And then also just to confirm, I know the officer's report said it is already public right of way, but just to confirm the signage which we'll be creating, will that, I know it's common sense hopefully, but will it say to users, pick up your litter and put your dogs on leash if there are horses nearby, something like that?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I mean, in terms of the second part of your question, Councillor Hilliard, that's a question better answered by a colleague such as Alan Otway, who's had responsibility for those, the nature of carrying out those works and making sure that proper facilities are provided and proper guidance is provided. In terms of the nature of the stepped access, I've taken you to this slide, and my understanding is it's simply to address the level of the slope within the area of land concerned. In effect, it's simply too steep to use it as a single slope, hence why it is stepped in that way. It's just to address the change in levels, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hilliard, are you?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, please. I think the officer discussed some of the small trees that were being taken down to have access. Can I just confirm that there are no other trees being felled in this? And particularly, I'm more sort of concerned about the Waitrose boundaries. There's nothing being done with trees there. And while I'm on to a question, I think we note from the report that the town council objected to this, and one of their main concerns was under ME1 per the local plan. Could the officer just comment on that as well, please? Thank you.
Mr. Hood.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So in terms of this planning application, we are not dealing with any proposals for the trees along the boundary of the Waitrose car park. My understanding is those trees are within the council's control, as is the car park. If any works to those trees were necessary and necessary consents were required as part of that, then obviously due process would be followed. And we are not granting through this planning application any works to those trees along that boundary there. Just bear with me 2 seconds while I look at the report for the town council comment in relation to ME1.
Paragraph 14.
Thank you, Councillor. Right. Yes, so in respect of whether the land is suitable, again, we are not, as part of this planning application, dealing with the principle of whether the land should be used as a heathland infrastructure project. And we are guided by Natural England. You'll see their views in the report. It was also picked up on in the associated scheme application for the residential development for which the HIP is related on the town centre site. And Natural England's advice is they're satisfied, and notwithstanding the flood risk that on part of the site, that they are satisfied it meets their criteria for the HIPS project. And as the relevant statutory expert, we are guided by them in that particular respect, Chairman.
Just to follow up on that, if I may. So I understand that in terms of the Heathlands planning framework, but did your answer specifically comment on the Christchurch and East Dorset local plan ME1 part, or? I thought you were more specifically commenting on the Heathlands planning framework.
Right, sorry. Let me just, if I just pick up on policy ME1, and I will, Chairman, and I'll just take to where what that policy is saying. So policy ME1 seeks to safeguard biodiversity and geodiversity as part of the application. So the site itself, my understanding is it does not have designations in itself. There's designations along the river, but not within the area of land. in terms of it acting as a mitigation for use elsewhere, again, the Natural England's advice is with the knowledge of what the policy is seeking to try and trying to achieve. The policy is obviously related to the Heathland mitigation policy that's applied across BCP and is consistent with that. So where we are meeting a requirement from Natural England to mitigate Heathland impact in accordance with the Heathland policy, then we can take it as read that it also applies with the adopted policy as well.
Thank you for that. Just in terms of summarising how I'm feeling about this application, I understand the knock-on implication from the previous application and why we're here, but this is this just feels like a particularly unhelpful site in terms of quite a lot of constraints as taken out in the report. It's in or next in the conservation area, significant flooding. One thing I found very interesting was it's like the historic grazing land, the fact of how long it's been actually as grazing land. So I just sort of questioned the suitability for it for a number of reasons in terms of increased access, and I just think it's a heavily constrained site. But I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kelsey.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just a quickie, really. This application was called in by Councillor Hall. Now, I don't particularly know this area that well, and I'm sure that Councillor Hall, being a resident locally there, knows a lot better than us. I was just wondering whether he actually wanted to speak on why he called it in and his reasonings for doing so that we can get more clarity. I agree with what Councillor Miller was just saying. It does seem a constrained site, so I'd like to get the perspective of Councillor Hall, being a local councillor, please.
I shall call him shortly. Councillor Barron.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just with reference to resident Sue Newman's email saying that there's water voles, which are a protected species, and also lynx footprints in the area. I find that quite concerning that, if the, nature's found it an acceptable place to be as it is, that putting in timber edging and gravel footpaths and steps and increasing footfall in there is going to be detrimental to the wildlife, really. So I'm just looking for a bit of more clarification on whether there are, well, water voles there or even lynx. Thank you.
Chairman, if I may, certainly that's the first that we've been made aware of it in relation to either the application or considering it as a HIPS project previously. We, in looking at these sites, we have the advantage of the what we would call the DIRC layer, which is still environmental records centre records, which record where we have protected species on the site, and every information that we get in terms of wildlife surveys, bat reports, feed into that wider DIRC layer. So Natural England have the advantage of all that information, along with the natural environment teams and our own internal officers, in considering whether a site is suitable for that proposed use. So that's all in understood, and the sensitivity of the site. And we would clearly, if Natural England felt that it was a site whereby additional use by residents was unacceptable in the ecological interests or biodiversity interests of the site. From our experience on other sites, we could be 100% sure that Natural England would be coming to us very firmly to say this is a site where we don't want to encourage further public usage. This is where we are with the Heathlands, for example. And so if a site is of such sensitivity that those issues are arising, Natural England are not shy and forthcoming in telling us that these aren't sites that they want to increase the use of. I think just in terms of the wider picture, we can acknowledge the concerns about some of the potential drawbacks of this particular site of the HIP. In terms of the wider picture, it's not the only HIP site on as compensation for that particular development. So there are two other sites which are on the River Stour side, which are all equally accessible to residents on that particular application. So it's a balance of those factors. This one's slightly nearer to the site, so it would be on the more obvious desire line in some ways, but in a situation whereby, for example, it was suffering from flooding, there are other sites available as part of the wider HIPS projects, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Did you want to come back on that, Councillor Barron?
Only that I'm yet to be convinced, to be honest with you. I think that, you know, nature does sometimes like to be left alone, and yes, there is already access to this area, but increasing that access and signage and that kind of thing, and with the best will in the world, you know, it's okay putting signs up saying keep your dogs on leads, but that's very often ignored. Increasing litter, I'm just very uneasy about it, to be totally honest. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Councillor Barron. I must admit I share your concerns, given the what we can see at the Talbot Heath, where dogs are not always kept to heel or on leash. The historical records, how historical are they? Because obviously nature changes, and we have some evidence of water voles. Is that has that evidence been looked at?
Chairman, as I say, that's the first mention that I'm aware of in dealing with the site, and also with regards to the wider application to which it's related. So the issue is whether the scheme is in some way incompatible with the habitat, and the scheme doesn't involve the banks of the mill race there, and deliberately seeks to site itself away from the actual banks, and any works within the banks of the river need approval also from the Environment Agency as well. So they have their own requirements to protect any works within the banks of the river. And again, I refer to the point that we are, in terms of the application, only dealing with the works within the red line on the screen in front of you for simply the creation of that walkway, and not the wider issue of whether that land should be used as a HIP. With that will go forward any case, because the open access exists, and the ability for the authority to carry out the remainder of the works shown on the final slide. So we're simply here discussing this side of the proposals because it forms a pedestrian access and what is a classified road. So were the works not forming onto a classified road, we wouldn't be before you with an application, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Can I call in Mrs. Barrable, who wishes to comment on Councillor Homecoming speaking?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I just wanted to go back on something that Councillor Kelsey said. He talked about the potential to bring Councillor Hall in, as he's familiar with the matters on this site. Councillor Hall has been advised that he has such an interest that he shouldn't take part today, hence the reason why he's actually dropped out at this part of the meeting. So in the circumstances, it would be inappropriate for you to bring him back in. He is in effect, or you would have had the opportunity, as though he was a member of the public or a ward councillor, which today does not involve speaking on the item. It involves, you know, submitting a written statement. So, Chairman, I would suggest that it's not appropriate that he be able to advise the committee on this.
Thank you, Mrs. Barrable. I'll take your advice on that.
Chair, could I apologize, I haven't RTS, but could I please just comment on that? Would you mind if I comment ask a question on that?
Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. So in normal circumstance, and I've done this before, I've been had to have been. Sorry, my son's just walked in. So, sorry, apologies about that. Yes, so, I've sat and I've been able to come away from the committee and sit and make a representation as the ward council, and then leave the room. So, is it just because of this particular circumstance that we're in a virtual meeting that Council Hall isn't afforded that luxury?
Mrs. Barrable?
Chairman, he would have been afforded the luxury not of actually speaking before the committee, because obviously Councillor Mellor's completely correct that in normal circumstances we would have had the public in on the meeting and the potential to have deputations along with ward members. So he would have been able to do that. With this particular meeting, as a first virtual meeting, it's been decided that there will be no public speaking or ward members speaking, that all of that will be dealt with by way of statements. And there's been no statement submitted by him before the deadline date. So in these circumstances, he won't have the right to submit a statement or speak today.
I do understand that, Nikki. The spirit of why we said that people weren't allowed to come and join this meeting because was for the technical reasons. We have Councillor Hall, in this meeting already, so that doesn't stand. So I believe this is one of those things where we might require to be. We've put this meeting together and the protocol around it, which has been excellently done. There's no reason we can't have a deputation from a member who's already here on this call. That wasn't the reason why we were moving to written representation. So I believe there's an element here potentially of chairman's discretion, where Councillor Kelsey's quite rightly asked. We look forward to local members having deputation when we have these meetings. There's no reason we don't need to do that now. So it's a byproduct of these rules being put together relatively quickly. So I would suggest that I would ask the chair to consider that before he omits Councillor Hall from speaking. I completely agree that at the point Councillor Hall has finished speaking, at that point he should stop and refrain from further comment on this item, effectively leave the room. I think that's certainly at least reasonable to consider. Thank you.
Chairman, can I just come back on that, please?
Yes, Mrs. Barrable.
Thank you. I would just suggest that at this particular moment in time, my understanding was that Councillor Hall would have actually left this meeting, that he wouldn't actually be part of this meeting at this moment in time.
But he would have been able to do that and then leave the room effectively. So
he would in normal circumstances. I totally agree, but we're not allowing.
The chairman's discretion. He can either make it or not. I've made my point clear. I think what you're suggesting absolutely is correct by the potentially how it's drafted. I'm saying that by these rules being done so quickly, they wouldn't be taking account of all council like this, and there's no reason why we can't hear from Councillor Hall. We would normally, admittedly it would have been at the start of this rather than in the middle of this, but we're having to reflect these policies as we go. So I understand what you're saying. I won't comment, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to hear from Councillor Hall.
Chairman, can I just come back on one particular point, please?
Please.
Just to say that, yes, I totally agree that in normal circumstances that would have been the case, as we've said. Ward members would normally have been allowed to speak, and it was discussed because they have got the same facilities as members of the planning board, whether they could Skype into the meetings. But currently it was decided that ward members would also not be able to speak, that they would have to submit statements. So I'd be very cautious about deciding at this point in time to bring somebody in. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Barrable. I note an RTS from Mrs. Jill Hollyoak. Did you want to comment on this item?
Thanks, Chairman. It was just really to reiterate the points that Nikki has made, and I think in fairness to the other ward councillors who, for this first meeting, have not been able to join in and speak, then I think we should treat all ward councillors the same. It is something I know that you will be looking at as a committee going forward, but for this first meeting, I think we need to have parity.
Thank you. I do agree with Mrs. Barrable that at this stage in the meeting where we started the debate, we've not allowed other spoken representations, and it could be deemed biased in one way or the other, depending on which way Councillor Hall was going to speak. So I won't be calling him to speak. Thank you. Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. In my view, the proposed access will increase traffic onto this land, and due to the environmental factors that have been highlighted, I don't think it's in the wider public interest to grant this. So therefore, today I won't be supporting this application.
And I would second that.
Was that a motion there, Councillor McCormack, or?
Yes, it was, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Trent.
Yeah, my request to speak was actually on the item about members speaking to committee. My understanding is that if someone was a member of the actual committee and they had some predetermination that involved them speaking, that they couldn't actually address the meeting, and they would have had to have got a colleague to do it for them. I actually thought that there was clear guidelines that if you were a member of the committee, that speaking to the committee as a ward councillor separate to being on the committee, if you've effectively predetermined something, actually ruled you out from doing that because of the regulations. And I'm hoping that at the end someone will clarify that, because you know, it's always been my understanding if I said I didn't like X, Y, and Z development, that I couldn't speak on it and then leave the room, because it would be determined that I would be having undue influence over the committee because I'm on the committee. That was my understanding of the ruling. So I'm hoping that perhaps after the meeting that someone clarifies that point for future reference, because otherwise, you know, there's a little bit of grey area there.
Thank you, Councillor. Mrs. Holyoake, you wish to come in at that?
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, just to say that obviously Councillor Hall would be speaking as a ward councillor, so he would say his piece and then he would leave the meeting ordinarily. So he wouldn't be actually a member of the committee for that item, and he wouldn't be speaking or voting.
Thank you. I have no other RTSs on screen. I have a motion to... A motion against the application, against the officer's recommendation, proposed by Councillor McCormack and seconded by Councillor Miller. Mr. Hodges, do you want to come back?
Yes, Chairman. If we're moving to a recommendation against, contrary to the officers want to approve, I'd like to understand and be clear on the reasons for refusal, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Councillor McCormack, do you wish to elaborate?
Yeah, I think that the proposed access would increase traffic on the site, which would have a detrimental effect on the environmental stability on that site, and it wouldn't be in the interest of the wider public for this access to be put in place.
Chairman, for my benefit, in terms of clarity on that point, is the concern about an increase in vehicular traffic, because it's a pedestrian access which is proposed, Chairman.
Councillor McCormack?
No, it's an increase in pedestrian activity on that site.
And the ensuing animals, you know, that would be you know, brought along with that pedestrian activity. In addition, you know, if there's an argument, it is contrary to ME1 per the local plan as well.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Do you want to say anything further, Mr. Hodges?
Just my concern that if we were advancing a reason for refusal in respect of policy ME1 about biodiversity impacts on the site, obviously we don't have any technical information to support that position, and in relation to the statutory consultee, for that matter, would of course be Natural England, and their view is that they support the scheme. So I would want to understand where our evidence came from for the harm on the biodiversity aspects, Chairman.
We also don't have and I've raised this point numerous times in relation to the Talbot heathlands. How can you talk about? We can't talk about biodiversity enhancements if we haven't got base data. So the argument goes the other way. Look, I'm happy to drop the point about ME1, but effectively, I'm still convinced this should be refused.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barron, did you want to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to, I'm not the Chair obviously, but potentially sort of slow this down a little bit. Is it possible that we can get up Sue Newman's photos of the water voles burrows, because it seemed to show it quite clearly in the photos that I was sent, and I presume other members and Democratic Services were sent the same email. Is it possible to get that up on the screen, just in case there's members of the committee that haven't actually seen those? Is that possible, please?
We're just looking at it, although of course members have already sent it.
To me, that does show pretty clear evidence, local evidence, as opposed to national evidence. Thank you.
Are we able to get that on the screen?
Chairman, again, I can't come in. Could you ask me to speak at some point, Anne Stribley?
Yes, certainly. Come in at this point, Councillor Stribley, while we try and find those, whether we can get that on the screen or not. So if you'd like to speak now, that's...
Okay, thank you. We're talking about a very small piece of footpath off the major highway. What evidence there might or might not be in the far distance of any other creatures, I think actually is irrelevant to this particular part of the application. And whilst I understand colleagues' concerns on those issues, I don't actually think they're relevant to this part of the planning application.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Davies, did you want to come in?
I've got concerns with certainly with the dogs, because I've got Hengistbury on my doorstep, and you only have to go across there and see the large amount of dogs that are allowed to run loose. So I am concerned about that.
Thank you. That certainly is a concern that I share about dogs running loose, as it were. Mr. Hodges, we now have the photos in front of us. So, is this the one that shows evidence of the water vole? Councillor Barron?
Thank you, Chair. Well, it certainly looks like it to me. And what does concern me about this application is obviously, it's a sort of salami effect of applications where it starts off with the gate and then it goes on and on and on. And then the next thing it's sort of excavation, which is, and with it being on a floodplain as well, to put in paths successfully, they obviously have to be raised. So I'm just very, very concerned that it's disturbing wildlife, really, potentially. I know that people have already got access to that, but I think it's going to be the increased access that could be detrimental to wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, just a question really. Are we sure the water vole is related to this piece of land? The reason I asked that question, in another county I was involved in a defence that found that the barn owls that were pictured were not actually related to the land on which they were claimed to be pictured. It also seems to me that this site, which is subject to flooding, and we've certainly seen that, has certain limitations and dangers as well to encourage access. So I'm not sure about this, and it seems to me for this to go ahead we need a lot more information to make a sound judgment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Hodges, can you come back in and just speak to whether we could get more information? Mr. Hodges?
Apologies, I was myself on mute that time, Chairman. You would have an option if you felt necessary that you could defer the application to ask the applicant to do more survey work if you felt there was grounds for deferring the application for that reason. My only concern about that would be if in the event of an appeal against non-determination, the evidence that we would put forward for a case for refusal in that regard. So it's within the council, it's within the committee's gift to defer, excuse me, and ask the applicant to do more survey work to clarify that position. And they could also provide, as part of that, a report which clarified the issue about whether the increased use of the land was compatible with the biodiversity interests on the site as well. That is for the committee to decide. As I say, my concern about that would be if an applicant then sought to appeal against non-determination and the strength of the case that we would have, because in effect we're dealing with a last-minute speculative suggestion of additional interest on the site. But you may wish to cover yourselves in that regard, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Does anyone wish to speak to that? Councillor Dunlop?
Sorry, no, wasn't to that particular point. I beg your pardon, Chairman. But I do wish to speak.
Okay, Councillor O'Neill.
Only to say that in order to make a sound judgment, we need the evidence. I think that's defence enough. Thank you.
Councillor Trent, is that on this point?
Yes, I think with the suggestion that it's deferred, I was minded to abstain based on what had gone so far, but if it's deferred, I'd be quite happy to propose that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dunlop, you have another point.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm wondering if I'm perhaps the only person who's happy to support this application. It seems to me that the footpath is necessary in terms of allowing improved enjoyment to open space, and certainly some of the work that's going on in the Heathland infrastructure. It's supported by Natural England because it provides that improved access to the common land at Milham's North. And I'm struggling to see any reason not to, but so I would be prepared to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say I agree with Councillor Dunlop on this one, and I think there's already a move on the table to refuse the application, which has already been seconded, so maybe we should be taking that one first. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Indeed, we have a motion on the table from Councillor McCormack to refuse the application, seconded by Councillor Miller. Before I go to the vote, do any officers wish to speak to this?
Chairman, just to confirm the point that in terms of if we were alleging a highway safety aspect about increased use of the access, that the highways officers do not object to the proposals on highway safety grounds.
Okay, members, so you've heard Mr. Hodges and what he has to say on this. I'm going to go to the vote because there is a motion on the table and it has been seconded. So again, in the usual way, I will call your names and ask you to indicate for, against, or abstaining. I'm just going to get my list of your names up. Councillor McCormack.
Voting for, against, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's for the motion. You're voting for the motion, which is to refuse the application.
Then for, yeah.
Councillor Bartlett.
Against.
Councillor Barron.
Against. Oh, sorry. For so I'm sorry. Yeah, for the motion to refuse. Thank you.
Councillor Davies.
Yes, for the motion to refuse.
Councillor Dunlop.
Against.
Councillor Hall. No, not Councillor Hall. Councillor Hilliard.
Against.
Councillor Johnson.
Against.
Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, against.
Councillor Lepoitevin.
Against.
Councillor Miller.
For.
Councillor O'Neill.
Abstain.
Councillor Stribley.
Against.
And Councillor Trent.
Abstain.
And Councillor Bull, myself, is against.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarity, to refuse the application for that motion, I have 4 voted for, 8 against, and 2 abstain.
Thank you, Mr. Harrod. So that motion has fallen. Do we have anybody who wishes to propose to grant the application?
I do, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dunlop.
Happy to second, Chairman, and Stribley.
Thank you, Councillor Stribley. Councillor Bartlett, you wish to speak?
I was just going to volunteer to propose or second it, and that's already been done. So,
thank you, Councillor. So, unless the officers want to come in here, I think we'll go straight to the vote. Okay, so this is a motion to approve the application proposed by Councillor Dunlop, seconded by Councillor Stribley. Councillor McCormack.
Against, and I'd like my vote recorded, please.
Councillor Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Barron.
Against, and I'd like my vote recorded, please.
Councillor Davies.
Abstain.
Councillor Dunlop.
For.
Councillor Hilliard.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Kelsey.
For.
Councillor Lepoitevin.
Abstain.
Councillor Miller.
Abstain.
Councillor O'Neill.
Abstain.
Councillor Stribley.
Sorry, for.
Councillor Trent.
For.
And myself, Councillor Bull, for. Mr. Harrod?
Yes, Chairman. Just confirm, for the officer recommendation, I have 8. Against, I have 2. And abstentions, I have 4.
So that's for the application. So that application is passed. Thank you. Let's moving on to the next application. Just give the officer time to set up. The application is 137 Rosemary Road.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Evans again. So on the application 137 Rosemary Road, proposal is for the demolition of an existing bungalow on site and the erection of 4 2-bed and 2 1-bed flats with access from Good Road and adjoining road. There is an extant planning permission for the 4 2-bed flats, of which more presently. Just to help members orientate themselves, Rosemary Road in the Newtown and Heatherlands ward of Poole. Application site occupies the corner at the junction of Good Road and Rosemary Road. In photograph hand corner, you can see a mini roundabout adjacent site. I have to advise you that in some of the photographs that I'll be showing you, the mini roundabout is there, and some it isn't. I'm afraid that's just because of the source material that we're using. The mini roundabout is there, at that junction of Good Road and Rosemary Road. So 137 Rosemary Road is the application site. Bungalow under a hip roof. 139, the adjoining bungalow, has one window on the side elevation right onto the boundary, very close to the boundary, with 137 Rosemary Road, and more of that later on. If I can draw your attention in the lower image to the mixture of 1 and 2 bedroom, sorry, 1 and 2 bedroom, 1 and 2 story properties which characterise the area. As you can see in the top image, beyond the junction, beyond Good Road, first property, a bungalow, second property, 2-story. And similarly, as you look down Rosemary Road, past 143 to 147, which is 2-story, and then 2-story beyond that. So very much mixed character within the street. Similarly, immediately in front of the site, on the opposite side of Rosemary Road, where Good Road continues beyond the roundabout, the ground levels fall away, and 69 Good Road, a bungalow. So that's immediately opposite the application site. But as you travel further down Rosemary Road, start with number 114A Rosemary Road, there's then a succession of 2-story properties. Again, coming back to the application site 137, the other side of Good Road, the bungalow that I mentioned earlier, and the 2-story homes beyond that. So what I'm going to do, for those who are not familiar now with the site, to draw attention really to that very mixed character within the area of 1 and 2-story development. To the rear of the site, again, the application site 137 Rosemary, the red line on there is an indication of the approximate rear elevation of the building that we'll be looking at in a moment. Again, more of which soon. And can I draw your attention on this to the secondary window in the side elevation and the gable-ended single-story elevation of 67 Good Road? And can I draw your attention to the position of the existing access and the walls and fences either side of it, which currently impede any kind of pedestrian visibility displays for vehicles entering or emerging from that access. In the lower image, and the distance between the application site 137, the white bungalow in the left, and the adjoining 167, you can see in the background the 2-story homes of Chloe Gardens. Again, we will come back to the relationship with Chloe Gardens as we start to look at the nature of the proposed development. So, as I said earlier, the application site already has permission for a 2-story block of flats with two bed on the ground floor, two bed on the first floor. The footprint of that extant scheme, the position of the building, that is, the layout of the car parking and access, the visibility, the bins, the numbers of parking spaces, and the bike store are all, to all intents and purposes, identical to the previously approved scheme. Therefore, this scheme replicates the 14-metre separation distance between the rear elevation of the proposed flats and the side elevation of 67, that being the building that I drew attention to with the high-level window, secondary window on the side elevation there. So a separation distance of 14.4 metres to that high-level secondary window. Similarly, the adjoining bungalow 139, separation with the window in the side elevation, separation distance of 3.2 metres. I will come back to that when we look at the elevation that faces that boundary of the application site. But I draw your attention to the reasonable amount of space around the building. As already approved, the building does project slightly further forward. I'm not sure how visible that dotted line is to you, but that dotted line is the position of the existing bungalow. So slightly further forward of the existing front elevation of the bungalow onto Rosemary Road, and similarly slightly further forward of its elevation onto the Good Road frontage, but to reiterate that point, as already approved. So identical in that respect to the previously approved scheme. So, comparison of the proposed and the approved scheme. Bottom images, the approved scheme, 2 stories of accommodation, ground floor flats, first floor flats. The difference with this scheme is the incorporation of 2 1-bed flats within the roof space. No changes to the volume of the roof other than that internal valleys in the roof form previously will now be filled in to create a flat roof. None of that is visible from outside the site, apparent in aerial views, but not apparent from the adjoining street. So up to eaves height identical, up to ridge height virtually identical, apart from the inclusion of the roof light Velux style windows. And if I can draw attention to the side elevation now, 2 ensuite bathroom windows approved in the east elevation, that is facing the bungalow with the 3.2 metre separation. Let me just go back to that to clarify that. So those windows are in this elevation with that 3.2 metre separation. They are 2 ensuite bathrooms and are obscure glazed. The introduction of the 2 additional flats would place a new ensuite Velux window with 1.6 sill height in the roof slope there, again replicating that relationship and not giving rise to any overlooking of the adjoining property. On that front elevation, the south elevation, the road frontage, the principal road frontage, 2 different sizes of Velux windows. So raised sill 1.6 high to the non-principal rooms, reduced sill height to 1.2 up to 1.4, and larger windows to the principal living space within the 2 flats. Bearing in mind that that has an aspect over the adjoining Rosemary Road to the beyond the public realm to the bungalow on the far side and beyond. Similarly, on the other 2 elevations, as already approved, bottom left on the north elevation, that's internally to the site, that's the view towards the car parking and to Chloe Gardens beyond. The changes there are the incorporation of 2 bedroom windows in the form of Velux windows with 1.6 metre high sill height. Similarly, on the west elevation, which is the elevation to Good Road, the same treatment up in all other respects other than the introduction of the additional windows to serve the new flat in the roof. Again, the same configuration of raised sill height for the non-principal spaces, that one being a secondary window within the principal living room, that one being a bedroom window. But again, the larger lower sill heights for the Velux windows that face onto the public realm. Again, just to reiterate those relationships, that 3.2 metres separation to the second, or to the window, not secondary, to the window on the side elevation of 139, faced by the 2 obscure glazed windows and the raised sill height Velux within the roof, all 2 en suites. And again, that 14 metres plus separation between the rear elevation, where there are already approved first floor windows, and the secondary window on the side elevation of number 67, and of course the addition of the 2 roof lights with the similar height sill levels to that on the rear elevation, slightly further away than the existing extant first floor windows. We've touched on the size of the accommodation on a couple of the earlier applications. Having been pre-warned that there was an issue on this one, just some information for you. The 2 flats proposed within the roof space, flat 5, a shower rather than a bath, and a bedroom designed for single occupancy, therefore meets the requirement. Therefore needs to meet the requirements for a 1-bed, 1-person unit, which is 39 if it has a bath square meters, 37 square meters without a bath. And if I can just draw your attention that it comes in at 40.8 square meters. Similarly, the green unit, unit 6, again, a shower rather than a bath, a bedroom that meets the criteria for a 1-person rather than a 2-person 1-bed flat. And again, same requirement, 37 square meters, and comes in at 40.2 square meters. There's clearly, as I would usually remind you, there is no requirement to meet those figures under the provisions of the pool local plan, and those figures are slightly inflated by the fact that there is a skilling ceiling, and the floor area is to be measured at a 1.5 metre ceiling height. So those figures will lose perhaps a few percentage points, but they will still exceed the 37 square metres, and as I say, are well within the parameters that would be required by the pool local plan. Chairman, the Heathland and Harbour recreation mitigation has been secured already on this site, and the recommendation therefore is approval subject to the conditions set out in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I shall now move on to the statements from members of the public. We have received a number of statements. I'll just get it up on my screen. We have the following written statements which have been received in objection from Ronald Ames, Mr. and Mrs. Miles, Mr. Durdle, Mr. Peter Phillips, Mrs. J. Maclachlan. In support, Richard Carr, Fortitudo Limited, and the Ward Councillor, Councillor Millie Earle, in objecting. Unless you indicate otherwise, I will assume you've all seen these and will take them into account in your debate. I will now go to Councillor Lepovedin.
Thank you, Chairman. I accept that the footprint and the bulk and the massing, apart from the slight differences on the roof, which don't add to the height, are as in the application that was approved very narrowly previously. So I'm not going to talk about those parts of the application. That's done and dusted. It can be built, so I accept that reluctantly. So I want to address the new aspects of this application, and there are two. One is the parking, which shows no increase in spaces, even though there are 2 extra flats. So if the 7 spaces were considered appropriate for 4 flats, are they also appropriate for now 6 flats? I would query that. But my main objection actually is on behalf of possible new residents in the roof space, particularly on the question of light. I accept that you can see out of them, but 1.6 sill height is eye level for most people, possibly well above eye level for quite a few people. So basically you could look out at the sky, bearing in mind, of course, that they are in a sloping roof. You would not, for most people, be able to see anything remotely like a view, or even the surrounding properties or trees or anything. Even the windows with a lower sill height I would find unacceptable. It just so happens that we have a Velux window in our attic, and the sill height is approximately the lower height that Mr. Evans has referred to. And it is true that if you get right up to the window, you can see out of it. These bigger windows with the lower sill are for living space, and if you're in the living space, a lot of the time you will be sitting down, probably on a settee. And from that level, even a sill height of 1.2 to 1.4 metres, you would not be able to see anything apart from sky, possibly some roofs. Effectively, you have no view. And the roof lights, the smaller ones, are very small. Yes, you've got a couple of roof lights which will help the situation in a particular area. I notice one is over the kitchen of flat 6. The other one, admittedly, is over the living area of flat 5, which is marginally more acceptable. And there's also the big one on the staircase. But I would not be at all happy that we were inflicting these sort of living conditions on the residents. Adding to that, as Mr. Evans has pointed out, the sloping roof ceiling of all these, of every part of these flats, cuts off usable space except for low furniture, that sort of thing. I would be very concerned. On the roof plan, you have the section marked here. Mr. Evans hasn't shown us that graphic on the presentation, but it is on the website on the planning application to show that a person standing in that window could see out. Now, I have concerns about that because I assume the top line is the roof, the second line below it, I assume, is the ceiling line. Now, assuming the person in the window is not more than 6 feet tall, the ceiling is very near his head, which suggests that the ceiling height is not acceptable either. So I have grave concerns for all these reasons to do with the living conditions, granted that the bulk and mass and footprint are no different from the original approved scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I recall voting against this, the last application, because of its bulk and scale. And like my colleague, that's done and dusted, so I won't go into that now. So it remains to address the changes, which are the 2 additional flats in the roof. The only concern I had was whether they met the living standards required for the national minimum living standards, and the officer has clearly made the point that yes, it's compliant. Therefore, I guess I have absolutely no reason to object to this. I cannot see any material planning grounds on which to object, and therefore, on that basis, I will support the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. In this case, I strongly object to this application. We reluctantly accepted a 2-storey building, and we were pointed to a building down the road that was 2-storey and said, well, that set the precedence for 2-storey. However, this is stressed, although the bulk and mass is the same as has been approved, and I've got no problem with that reluctantly, but this is effectively adding an extra storey on top of what's already there, and it's doing it by providing 2 totally inadequate units for standalone units. If it was a case of having something in the attic of an existing 2-storey dwelling, then that's all well and good. That's up to the people that apply, and it's then down to the design and overlooking and all of the other aspects. But this is literally trying to run roughshod over the planning in the other direction, trying to get a 3rd storey up. And quite frankly, if this was accepted, this is the thin end of a wedge, and the next time a bungalow or a couple of bungalows is knocked down, or sold and knocked down, then it'll be a 3-storey application justified by the fact that this one is 3 stories, and before you know where you are, they'd be trying to get roof space in the 4th storey. So personally, I think this is totally unacceptable. It sets a precedent which shouldn't be set in that area. The area is characterised mainly by bungalows with a few 2-storey buildings. So I don't think we should set a precedent for even taller buildings than the 2-storey one that's already approved.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, this building isn't any taller than what is already approved, and I don't see any planning reason whatsoever to refuse this these 2 additional apartments, especially considering that we are in need of mixed development in the area and generally smaller dwellings for people getting onto the housing ladder and trying to start off. The one comment I would like to make, when we looked at the original planning application, I did point out that across the Rosemary Road frontage and just round the corner there was a very nice low brick wall, which then turned into a very unpleasant concreted section along Good Road. and the point was made that that perhaps that brick wall should continue around the building. I actually don't mind whether the brick wall continues, but I would suggest that the boundary wall for the proposal should be comprehensive and approved by the officers, both on the Rosemary Road and the Good Road frontage. So while I'm not wedded to a wall, but I am wedded to a more comprehensive boundary treatment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Davies, did you want to say anything?
Yes, I understand that, that reluctantly was accepted before, but this now seems to me that it's squeezing a quart into a pint pot. And I think that the previous councillor said, that we should be very careful of accepting, because we will be setting a precedent that we know that people soon very quickly jump onto the bandwagon. So I'm not happy with it, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barron.
Thank you, Chair. It was basically, I was just asking whether they are lanterns in the ceiling, and I guess they are, where the flat roof is, to give additional light into the new proposed flats. I understand Councillor Trent's concerns, but we're not talking about dormer windows or mansard roofs. Yes, it's 3-storey, but it is still a pitch roof, and it is. I honestly think that when you drive along the road, if this is approved and in years to come you drive along the road, you probably wouldn't actually notice it. And I also think that no developer is going to go to the time of getting planning and building something that no one would want to live in. I actually don't think that it's going to be like a horrible little hovel sort of apartments in the roof there, personally. I know I've lived in worse. So yeah, I'm kind of, yeah, I'm not against this application, actually. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mrs. Barrable.
Thank you, Chairman. You probably know what I'm going to actually say. I'm just going to refer to earlier comments about this setting a precedent and remind members that there is no such thing as a precedent in planning. Each case will be taken on its own merits, and obviously this property, if it's acceptable here, doesn't mean it would be acceptable round the corner or anywhere else. If it's not acceptable here, the same applies. Somewhere else it may be acceptable. So just to remind members that to disregard the comments about precedents, because there's no such thing in planning terms.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, no, it was really along the same lines, actually. There were a few comments made before me about them being inadequate as living spaces. They meet the standards, they meet all the planning requirements. If somebody who was going to live in it decides it's not inadequate, they simply don't move into the property. Our job is to decide whether or not it meets the planning standards, and I can't see any reason why it doesn't. So really, if somebody doesn't like the property, they simply don't move there. So in my opinion, this is perfectly acceptable. The bulk and the scale of the building have already been approved. It doesn't change that, and I really can't see any reason to refuse this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Neill.
Similar comments, really. I mean, I think the design is very acceptable. It's not unattractive. It's considered. Its spacing's good. Along the Rosemary Road, there are quite a number of 2-storey houses. Although this goes into the roof, I can't see any reason on planning basis to refuse it. There is a need for 1-bedded accommodations, and as was previously stated, if they were not saleable or rentable, people wouldn't take them up. I'm sure with this design they would. If it was an application or another application for an existing household to develop their roof along similar lines to accommodate either their children or other members of their family, we would probably approve it. I actually see no reason to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kelsey.
Thank you, Chairman. Like a couple of my previous colleagues there, I agree with them entirely. Mrs. Barrable stole my thunder, and I was actually going to say that there is no such thing as precedent in planning. and each application is on its merit. I agree with Councillor Bartlett. This is not making a vast difference. It's just a couple of smaller flats up in the roof. If this, like the previous speaker has said, was coming in just as an ordinary household amendment, we would probably be granting it, and I see no reason for us not to on this occasion. And if it hasn't already been done so, Chairman, I would move that we accept the officer's recommendation.
I would second that.
Thank you, Councillor Kelsey, who's moved the motion, and Councillor O'Neill, who seconded the motion to go the recommendation and grant this application. Do any officers want to come in at this point?
Yes, Chairman, if I could, it's Mr. Evans, if I could just clarify a couple of points on questions that were left hanging or perhaps unanswered. There's a question, Councillor Poitevin said, asked about car parking. Excuse me. The car parking is the same as was previously proposed for the 4 flats. That was significant over provision for the 4 flats. The 7 parking spaces within the proposals more than meet the unallocated parking requirements for the 6 flats. They come very close, but fall slightly short of meeting the allocated requirements. So there is certainly adequate car parking proposed. Councillor Mr. Stripley raised the point about the boundary treatment. If I could perhaps just draw the councillor's attention to condition number 5 within the recommendation, which replicates the condition attached to the previous consent, which picked up on the point about retaining the character of the front wall in case members don't have it immediately in front of them. It requires the details of the position, design, materials of the proposed boundary treatments to be submitted and approved. It goes on to say, so far as is practicable to do this, the treatment of the road frontage shall retain, replicate or incorporate the existing low red brick walls to these frontages, and then requires that boundary treatment to be implemented. That was something that came out of discussion on the previous approval, and therefore the recommendation incorporates that in the current recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I shall now move to the vote. Just to reiterate, the motion is to accept the recommendations and grant the application proposed by Councillor Kelsey, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. Please state whether you're for, against or abstaining. Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bartlett.
For.
Councillor Barron.
For.
Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Dunlop.
For.
Councillor Hall. Councillor Hilliard.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Kelsey.
For.
Councillor Lepoverdine.
Against.
Councillor Miller. He's left, hasn't he? Councillor O'Neill.
For.
Councillor Stribley.
For.
Councillor Trent.
Against.
And myself, Councillor Bull, for. Mr. Harrod.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Bear with me just a short moment. So I have 11 voted for, 2 against, and I have Councillor Hall who did not come through, and I also have Councillor Mellor who did not vote as he left the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Harrod. I don't know if Councillor Hall is there, but we couldn't hear him.
Yeah, I did say 4.
Thank you. Can we record that, please, Mr. Harrod? Is that a...
Yes, that's recorded. So there are 12 for and 2 against.
Thank you. So that motion is passed and the application is granted. That's the final application from today's agenda. So thank you, everybody. A particular thank you to all the staff who have made this e-communication system work fairly effectively. And I'll draw the meeting to a close there. Thank you.